I am Maya, 32 years old, the disappointment of my status-obsessed family. Last weekend, my father slammed his fist on a table at the most exclusive country club in the city, demanding the manager throw me out. My mother ordered me removed before my sister and her wealthy in-laws arrived. I stood quietly as the manager rushed over. But instead of throwing me out, he smiled at me and asked how I would like to handle my family membership. Their faces dropped. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you ever had to remind your toxic family who they are dealing with. Get the manager right now. Marcus, my father, bellowed his fist, striking the polished mahogany table of the Oak Ridge Country Club VIP dining room. He pointed a trembling finger at my face. She does not belong in this room. We were sitting in a private VIP suite with panoramic views. It was supposed to be an elegant Sunday brunch. Instead, it was my public execution. My mother Vivian adjusted her designer pearls, her eyes scanning my simple tailored linen suit with absolute disgust. "You are humiliating this family, Maya," Vivian hissed, leaning across the table so her voice would not carry to the hallway. "Preston and his parents will be here any minute. They flew in from Connecticut and you show up looking like you just got off a shift at some discount department store. Are you trying to ruin your sister marriage by embarrassing us in front of people who actually matter? We have a legacy to uphold, and your presence is a threat to everything we have built." Chloe, my 29-year-old sister, and the undisputed golden child, sat next to her husband Preston, sipping her mimosa with a bored expression. She did not even look at me. She just inspected her manicured nails, perfectly content to let our parents do her dirty work, soaking up the praise, while I took the blame for every minor inconvenience our family faced. Preston, my 34-year-old white brother-in-law, chuckled. He worked in finance and wore his entitlement like cheap cologne. He pulled out a crisp $20 bill and tossed it across the table toward me. It landed near my water glass, a blatant insult wrapped in a smile. "Here you go, Maya." Preston smirked, his tone dripping with that familiar condescending white savior complex. "Go find a fast food restaurant down the street. It is honestly embarrassing that you still leech off your parents' country club membership at your age. Did you ever even finish that degree? Or are you still a college dropout trying to find yourself while your sister actually builds a life? You know, diversity initiatives are great, but they cannot fix laziness." My parents nodded in agreement, completely validating his blatant disrespect. To them, Preston was the prize. He had the right job on Wall Street and the background to elevate our family status in the black elite social circles they desperately clung to. They ignored his constant microaggressions because he provided the aesthetic of success they craved. I, on the other hand, was just the scapegoat. The daughter who walked away from their stifling expectations years ago. The one they branded a failure because I refused to play their exhausting game of appearances and debt. I did not touch the money. I simply picked up my glass of sparkling water and took a slow, deliberate sip. My calm demeanor only infuriated Marcus further. He absolutely hated when he could not control my emotional reactions. I said, "Get out." Marcus demanded, his face turning a dangerous shade of red as he stood up from his chair. "You are a stain on this family legacy. If you do not walk out that door right now, I will have security drag you out. I will not let you sit here and sabotage Chloe's future with your pathetic attitude." Right on cue, the heavy oak doors of the VIP suite swung open. Mr. Sterling, the general manager of Oak Ridge Country Club, rushed into the room. He was a distinguished man who usually maintained perfect composure, but today he looked slightly out of breath, accompanied by two large security guards in tailored suits. "Finally," Marcus barked, waving his hand toward me with an air of absolute authority. "Mr. Sterling, remove this woman from our table immediately. She is trespassing on my private reservation and causing a disturbance. Cancel her guest access and make sure she is escorted entirely off the premises before our real guests arrive." Vivian crossed her arms, a triumphant smirk appearing on her face as she prepared to watch me be publicly humiliated. Preston leaned back in his chair, swirling his expensive drink, thoroughly enjoying the show he thought he was about to witness. But Mr. Sterling walked straight past Marcus. He completely ignored my father's outstretched hand and bypassed Vivian entirely. He stopped right beside my chair, straightened his posture, and offered me a deep, highly respectful bow. "I apologize for the disturbance, Miss Maya," Mr. Sterling said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent room. He turned a sharp, unamused gaze toward my parents before looking back down at me. "Your personal security detail alerted me that there was an issue in your private suite. How would you like to handle your family membership status today?" The silence that slammed into the room was deafening. Marcus froze, his mouth hanging half. Vivian's triumphant smirk completely vanished, instantly replaced by a look of sheer confusion. Preston stopped swirling his drink, the color draining from his face. I slowly set my water glass down on the polished mahogany table. I looked at my father, then at my mother, and finally let my eyes rest on Preston. I smiled. "Cut their cards, Mr. Sterling," I said smoothly, "and escort them off my property." "Your property?" Marcus stammered, his face shifting from crimson to a sickly pale. "What kind of delusional nonsense are you spouting? You do not own anything but the cheap clothes on your back. You are a complete failure." Mr. Sterling did not flinch. He stood tall beside me, his hands clasped neatly behind his back. "Ms. Maya is completely accurate, sir. As of Thursday morning, her investment firm officially acquired the entire $12 million debt this club had been carrying for the past decade. She is the sole principal owner of Oak Ridge Country Club. Therefore, she has absolute authority to revoke your family membership effective immediately." The heavy silence returned, suffocating the VIP suite. The clinking of silverware from the main dining hall outside felt a million miles away. Marcus gripped the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles turning white as his brain short-circuited, trying to process the reality that his scapegoat daughter now owned the very establishment that validated his entire social existence. Vivian was the first to recover. The sheer panic in her eyes instantly melted into a terrifyingly calculated smile. She stood up, smoothing down her designer dress, and walked toward me with her arms outstretched. "Maya, my brilliant, brilliant girl," Vivian cooed, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "I knew it. I always knew you had this inside you. All those times I pushed you, all those times I was hard on you when you were younger, it was just my tough love working its magic. I had to be strict so you would build that thick skin. You see, Marcus, our parenting paid off perfectly." I stepped back before she could touch me. The audacity of her gaslighting was breathtaking. She was trying to claim credit for a success she had actively tried to destroy. "Do not touch me," I said, my voice cold enough to freeze the champagne in their glasses. "You do not get to claim my empire as your parenting victory. You spent my entire childhood telling me I would end up on the street. You refused to co-sign my first business loan because you said I lacked the intelligence to manage money." "Well," Vivian chuckled nervously, waving her hand as if swatting away a pesky fly. "Water under the bridge, darling. Since you own the place now, we can use this suite to host Preston and his parents tonight. It will be absolutely perfect. You can comp the entire dinner for us and show your sister-in-law's family how well we do things here in our community." Preston scoffed loudly, breaking the illusion Vivian was desperately trying to build. He stood up, adjusting his expensive suit jacket, his blue eyes glaring at me with undisguised contempt. "Give it a rest, Vivian," Preston sneered. "We all know how this really works." He took a step toward me, his height meant to be intimidating. "Tell us, Maya, how many diversity quotas did the bank have to fill this quarter to approve a loan for someone like you? It is no secret that financial institutions are practically handing out free money to minority women right now just to hit their corporate social responsibility targets. Anybody can be an owner when the system lowers the bar for them." Chloe finally spoke up, her voice shrill and panicked. "Preston is right. You did not earn this. You just got lucky with some diversity handout, and now you are trying to embarrass my husband in front of his family. You are so jealous of my marriage that you bought a country club just to ruin my brunch." I looked at Preston, the mediocre finance bro, who thought his skin color and gender made him the smartest person in any room. Then I looked at my sister, who had spent her entire life tearing black women down just to secure a seat at a white table. "I did not use a bank loan, Preston," I stated flatly. "I bought the debt in cash. Cash generated from the commercial real estate portfolio you and my family mocked for the last 7 years." I turned back to Mr. Sterling. "Please bring them their bill for this brunch." Add a 20% gratuity for the inconvenience they have caused your staff, and cancel their dinner reservation for tonight. I am not paying for this, Marcus yelled. Then you can wash dishes in the back, I replied, turning on my heel. Have a lovely afternoon. I walked out of the VIP suite, ignoring the shouting echoing behind me. I needed fresh air. I needed to get away from the toxic delusion that fueled my family. But inside the suite, sheer panic had taken over. Chloe was hyperventilating. Preston's parents were due to arrive in less than 30 minutes, and her family had just been stripped of their membership and their reservation. Her entire pristine image was about to collapse, desperate to maintain the illusion of extreme wealth. Chloe slipped out of the room while Marcus and Preston argued with the security guards. She hurried over to the concierge desk in the private hallway. She knew my corporate account details were kept on file in the club VIP registry. Using a moment of distraction when the desk attendant turned away to answer a phone call, Chloe reached over the counter and accessed the club tablet. She quickly memorized the digital card number attached to the owner profile. Returning to the suite, she flagged down a passing server who had not yet received the eviction memo. "We are upgrading our celebration," Chloe demanded, her voice trembling with false bravado. "Bring us 3 bottles of your most expensive vintage champagne right now. Put it on the owner corporate account." I was walking across the manicured grounds toward the private parking lot where my armored SUV was waiting. The afternoon sun felt good against my skin, washing away the chill of my family presence. I reached into my purse to grab my keys when my phone buzzed violently. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. An automated text message from my corporate bank glowed brightly. Fraud alert. A charge of $15,000 has been authorized at Oak Ridge Country Club for vintage champagne. Reply yes to confirm or no to report fraudulent activity. I stopped dead in my tracks. A cold, calculated realization washed over me. They actually thought they could steal from me in my own establishment. They thought their desperation gave them the right to commit grand larceny just to impress some racist in-laws. I gripped my phone and turned slowly back toward the grand clubhouse. I tapped my earpiece, connecting directly to my head of security. "Lock the doors to the VIP suite immediately," I commanded, my voice steady and unyielding. "Nobody gets out. Then call the police. We have a credit card thief inside." 2 uniformed police officers arrived at the Oak Ridge Country Club within minutes. I met them in the grand lobby, flanking them with my head of security as we marched back down the mahogany-paneled hallway toward the VIP suite. I could hear the muffled, frantic shouting even before my security chief unlocked the heavy double doors. Inside the room, Chloe was pacing like a caged animal. 3 bottles of vintage champagne sat unopened on the table, mocking her panic. When the police walked in, her perfectly contoured face contorted into pure terror. She shrank behind her husband, grabbing his expensive suit jacket. Preston puffed out his chest, stepping squarely in front of the officers. He adjusted his posture, slipping instantly into the arrogant tone he reserved for people he considered beneath him. "Officers, there has been a massive misunderstanding," Preston said, offering a slick, practiced smile. "I am a senior vice president in wealth management. I have an unblemished record, and my family has extensive ties to the mayor's office. My wife simply authorized a beverage order on a family tab. This is a private civil matter, not a criminal one." The taller officer, a stern-faced black man who clearly had no patience for Preston and his entitlement, held up a hand. "Sir, step aside. We received a report of felony credit card fraud. Using a corporate account without authorization for a $15,000 purchase is grand larceny." Preston's face hardened, his white privilege hitting a brick wall. "You cannot arrest my wife. Do you have any idea the kind of lawsuit I will bring down on this department? I know my rights, and I know your commanding officers. If you interfere with my investigation, sir, I will arrest you for obstruction," the officer replied, his voice dangerously low. "Now step back." Chloe burst into hysterical sobs, collapsing into a chair. She looked at Vivian, who was frozen in shock, her pearls clutched tightly in her manicured hand. "Do something," Mom, Chloe wailed. "I cannot go to jail. My in-laws are on their way. They will cancel the trust fund if I get a criminal record." Marcus rushed forward, inserting himself between the police and his precious golden child. He turned to me, his eyes wide with a desperate, frantic energy. He abandoned his usual booming authority and resorted to begging. Maya, please, Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them she had permission. Are you really going to let them put your own sister in handcuffs? Are you going to ruin her life just like you ruined your own education? The air in the room went dead. He had actually said it. He had handed me the exact weapon I needed. I signaled the police officers to pause for a moment. I stepped right up to Marcus, forcing him to look me in the eye. I ruined my education. I repeated, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Is that the story you tell your country club friends, Marcus? That your oldest daughter was too lazy to finish her degree, so she dropped out? Vivian stepped forward, her eyes darting nervously toward Preston. Maya, stop it. Do not do this here. Not in front of Preston. No, let us talk about my education, Vivian, I snapped, cutting her off. I turned back to Marcus. Tell Preston exactly why I had to drop out of my university during my sophomore year. Tell him what happened to the $50,000 inheritance grandmother left in a trust explicitly for my tuition. Marcus swallowed, hard sweat beading on his forehead. We needed that money for a family emergency. A family emergency. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that made Chloe flinch. You drained my entire tuition trust fund to pay for Chloe's extravagant destination wedding to Preston. You stole $50,000 from your own daughter to buy custom imported floral arrangements and ice sculptures because you were terrified Preston wealthy parents would realize you were actually broke. You sacrificed my future just to buy a white finance bro into the family and keep up your fake bougie facade. Preston turned sharply, staring at Marcus and Vivian. His jaw dropped. You paid for our wedding with stolen tuition money. You told me you liquidated a minor stock portfolio. They do not have a stock portfolio, Preston, I stated brutally. They have debt and lies. And now your wife has grand larceny to add to the family resume. Chloe sobbed harder, burying her face in her hands. Please, Maya. Please do not let them take me. I will do anything. I looked at the officers who were standing by, ready to proceed. Then I looked at Marcus, the man who had mocked me, belittled me, and stolen my future just to elevate my sister. I will drop the charges right now on one condition, I said. You pay the $15,000 for the champagne immediately, plus a $5,000 penalty for the disruption to my staff. $20,000 transferred to my corporate account in the next 60 seconds, or she leaves in a squad car. Marcus shook his head frantically. I do not have $20,000 in liquid cash right now, Maya. You know that. But you have your secret retirement account, I countered, watching Vivian's eyes snap wide open. Yes, Vivian, he has a hidden account he set up 3 years ago to hide money from your shopping sprees. I saw the statements when I audited the club membership files. Marcus looked like he was going to vomit. If he drained that account, he would have absolutely zero safety net left. The illusion of his wealth would be entirely gone. He looked at the police holding the handcuffs, then at his sobbing golden child, and finally at the furious glare of his son-in-law. With trembling hands, Marcus pulled out his phone. He logged into his banking app under the watchful eyes of my security chief. I watched the screen as he initiated the wire transfer, watching his secret safety net drop to practically nothing. The confirmation beeped on my phone a moment later. The debt is settled, I told the officers. It was a misunderstanding. I will not be pressing charges today. The officers nodded, clearly disgusted by the entire family dynamic, and left the room. My security team stepped back, leaving the path to the door open. Preston grabbed Chloe by the arm, hauling her roughly to her feet. We are leaving, he hissed, his face a mask of pure fury. And you two, he pointed at my parents, stay far away from my family tonight. As Preston dragged a weeping Chloe out of the suite, Vivian turned to me. Her carefully constructed high society mask had completely shattered, leaving behind a vicious, hateful glare. She stepped into my personal space, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You think you have won because you have some money now, Vivian seethed. You think you can humiliate us and just walk away. I am on the board of the Lynx. I know every influential family in this city. By tomorrow morning, I will make sure everyone in our circle knows you are a vindictive, unstable fraud. I will destroy your reputation so thoroughly, you will never show your face in high society again. I looked down at her, smiling a cold, predatory smile. I am looking forward to it, Vivian, I replied. Now get off my property. I watched Vivian march down the grand staircase of the country club, her heels striking the marble like weapons. She was already pulling her phone from her designer handbag, her thumbs flying across the screen. Vivian was a legacy member of an incredibly exclusive organization for African American women in the country. Within 48 hours, my name was dragged through the mud across every elite group chat and private high society lunch in the city. The Whisper network was vicious and incredibly efficient. According to the rumors Vivian carefully planted, I was not a self-made business owner. I was a high-end escort. I was a complete fraud who had seduced a hidden elderly white billionaire to bankroll a fake real estate portfolio. Vivian spun a tragic tale of how she and Marcus had tried to save my soul, but I had chosen a life of sin and degradation to spite my hardworking sister. She made Chloe out to be the innocent victim of my supposed jealousy. She claimed the only reason I had any money to buy the country club debt was because I was laundering illicit funds. My phone buzzed constantly with text messages from former friends and distant relatives, demanding to know if the scandalous stories were true. I did not answer a single one of them. While Vivian was busy playing the ultimate victim and weaponizing her social connections, I was finalizing the largest corporate acquisition of my career. Let her talk. Lies were the only currency she had left anyway. 3 nights later, the annual Heritage Foundation Charity Gala was held at the Grand Ballroom downtown. It was the crowning event of the season where the Black elite gathered to display their generational wealth and secure their social standing. I arrived in a custom emerald gown, stepping out of my vehicle with my legal team and security close behind. The ballroom was a magnificent sea of crystal chandeliers, lush floral arrangements, and perfectly tailored tuxedos. It took exactly 2 minutes for Vivian to spot me. She was standing near the center ice sculpture holding court with a group of prominent board members. Chloe and Preston were right beside her, playing the perfect successful couple for the cameras. The moment Vivian locked eyes with me, her face tightened into a mask of pure indignation. I watched as she leaned in and whispered frantically to the board members, pointing directly at me. She was rallying her troops. A moment later, Vivian and Chloe marched across the ballroom floor, trailing 2 event organizers and a uniformed security guard behind them. "What is she doing here?" Vivian demanded, her voice cutting sharply through the soft jazz playing in the background. She pointed a manicured finger at me, her eyes blazing with hostility. I explicitly warned the committee about her presence. She is a fraud and a social pariah. Her presence here mocks the integrity of this entire foundation and insults every respectable family in this room. Chloe crossed her arms, nodding vigorously, as several guests turned their heads to watch the drama unfold. "You need to escort her out immediately," Chloe told the bewildered event organizers. "She is harassing our family and attempting to crash a highly respectable event. My husband is a top sponsor tonight, and he will not tolerate this kind of disrespect." Preston stepped forward, adjusting his silk tie with a smug, highly arrogant grin. He looked me up and down, shaking his head in mock pity. "Maya, you really do not know when to quit, do you?" Preston sighed, adopting his usual condescending tone. "This is not some cheap nightclub where you can hustle for a quick buck. This is a room full of actual professionals. I am a senior vice president at Vanguard Financial. We manage real money for real people. You are embarrassing yourself and you are upsetting my wife. I suggest you walk out that door before I have the police remove you for trespassing again." The event organizers looked incredibly uncomfortable, shifting their weight as the tension drew the attention of even more nearby guests. Vivian stood tall, bathing in the attention, convinced she had successfully orchestrated my public downfall in front of the city's most elite families. I simply smiled, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from my emerald gown. "I am not trespassing, Preston," I said, my voice perfectly calm and steady. "And I highly doubt Vanguard Financial would appreciate their senior vice president attempting to throw out an invited guest." Preston laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed over the music. "Invited guest. Please, Maya, tickets to this gala cost $10,000 a plate. Your supposed billionaire sugar daddy must be feeling particularly generous tonight to let you out of his sight." Before I could respond, the heavy microphone feedback echoed through the grand ballroom, signaling the start of the evening presentations. The event host, a prominent local judge, stepped up to the grand podium at the front of the room. The chatter immediately died down as guests turned their attention to the stage. "Welcome, esteemed guests. The host began, his voice booming over the large speakers. Tonight we are celebrating an unprecedented milestone for the Heritage Foundation. We have surpassed all previous fundraising records thanks to a truly monumental contribution. Please direct your attention to the stage as we recognize our new diamond sponsor. This remarkable individual has not only pledged a transformative donation tonight, but just this morning finalized a historic corporate acquisition. They are the new majority shareholder and absolute owner of Vanguard Financial. Preston froze. His smug smile vanished instantly. The host beamed, looking directly toward the back of the room where I was standing. Please join me in welcoming a true titan of industry and our diamond sponsor, Miss Maya. The bright spotlight swung across the ballroom, cutting through the dim lighting and landing squarely on me. Deafening applause erupted, shaking the crystal chandeliers above us. Vivian gasped, taking a physical step backward, as if she had been violently struck. Chloe covered her mouth, her eyes wide with absolute horror. Beside them, Preston let out a choked, breathless sound. The expensive crystal champagne glass slipped right through his fingers and shattered into 100 jagged pieces against the marble floor. He stared at me, his face entirely drained of color, as the horrifying reality finally crushed him. The black sister-in-law he had relentlessly mocked, demeaned, and racially profiled was now his absolute boss. The shattered glass lay on the marble floor, a perfect reflection of Preston and his completely shattered ego. He could barely breathe as the thunderous applause washed over me. I did not stay to mingle with the stunned faces of my family or to answer their frantic questions. I had made my point, and I had a multi-billion-dollar company to run. Monday morning arrived with the crisp efficiency of a new era at Vanguard Financial Headquarters. I sat behind the massive mahogany desk in the corner office on the 50th floor, looking out over the city skyline. I had spent the entire weekend auditing the executive portfolios and familiarizing myself with the dead weight pulling the firm down. The absolute heaviest anchor was currently marching down the hallway. The heavy glass door to my office swung open without a knock. Preston barged past my executive assistant, his face flushed and his expensive suit looking slightly wrinkled. He closed the door firmly behind him and took a deep breath, clearly trying to force his panic down and summon his usual arrogant white savior persona. He walked over to my desk and leaned his hands on the polished wood, attempting to physically loom over me. "Maya, we need to have a serious conversation." Preston began, his voice adopting that sickeningly patronizing tone he used whenever he wanted to explain how the world worked. "Listen, I know you pulled off a massive stunt at the gala. It was very flashy and it certainly humiliated Vivian and Marcus, which I know you enjoyed. But buying a controlling stake in a firm like Vanguard is entirely different from actually running it." I sat back in my leather chair, crossing my arms. "Is that right, Preston? Please enlighten me." I took my silence as an invitation to mansplain my own empire to me. He began pacing the length of my office, gesturing wildly. "You do not understand high-level elite markets, Maya. Our clients are generational wealth families, institutional investors, and massive corporate trusts. They expect a specific pedigree. They expect someone who understands the nuances of high society finance. If word gets out that someone with your unconventional background is making the calls, they will pull their capital by the end of the week. The market is unforgiving to outsiders." He stopped pacing and offered me a magnanimous smile like he was throwing me a lifeline. "But I can fix this for you. I am already established here. The board trusts me. The clients trust me. I can step up as the managing partner and act as the public face of Vanguard. You stay entirely behind the scenes, collect your dividends, and let me handle the elite networks. I will steer the ship so you do not crash it. It is the only way your investment survives." I stared at him, letting his delusions hang in the empty air. He genuinely believed that despite owning the building, the bank, and his paycheck, I somehow desperately needed his mediocrity to survive. I opened the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a thick red folder, dropping it heavily onto the desk. I spent the weekend reviewing the performance metrics for all senior vice presidents. I said, my voice dangerously calm. I opened the folder to the first page. "Let us talk about your elite financial genius, Preston. Over the last 4 quarters, your personal portfolio yield has consistently underperformed the market average by nearly 3%. You lost two major institutional accounts last month because you failed to file their risk assessment reports on time. In fact, the only reason your division showed any profit at all is because your junior analysts have been working 80-hour weeks to cover your massive glaring mistakes. Preston's face dropped, his arrogant smile completely vanishing. Those are highly complex market fluctuations, he stammered, taking a step back. You cannot just read a spreadsheet and understand the strategic long-term plays I am making. I understand that you are a mediocre liability who has been coasting on your race, gender, and unearned confidence. I fired back, shutting the folder with a sharp smack. You are not a titan of industry, Preston. You are a fraud who uses my sister family name to sound diverse, while using your own privilege to hide your staggering incompetence. You cannot speak to me like that. Preston snarled, his face turning red with rage. I am a senior vice president in this firm. I bring in the elite clients. Not anymore, I replied, leaning forward. You are officially stripped of your senior vice president title. Your corner office is being cleared out as we speak. Effective immediately, you are demoted to a junior analyst position. Your new cubicle is on the 4th floor, right next to the summer interns. You will be reporting directly to Marcuson, the black regional manager you tried to get fired last year. Preston slammed his fist on my desk, his eyes bulging. You are out of your mind if you think I'm going to sit in a cubicle and take orders from Marcuson. I will quit right now. I will walk out that door and take my entire client list to your biggest competitor. I smiled, sliding a single sheet of paper across the desk. Read your contract, Preston. If you resign, you forfeit every single unvested stock option you have desperately relied on to fund your fake, lavish lifestyle. Furthermore, your non-compete clause strictly forbids you from working in the financial sector in this city for 2 full years. If you quit, you walk away with absolutely nothing, and you will be unemployable. So I suggest you head down to the 4th floor and start fetching coffee for your new boss. Preston stared at the contract, his breathing ragged and heavy. He was completely trapped and he knew it. Without saying another word, he turned and stormed out of my office, slamming the heavy glass door so hard the walls shook. But Preston was not heading to the 4th floor. He marched straight down the executive hallway toward his old corner office, his mind consumed by a blinding, venomous rage. He knew IT would revoke his executive server access within the hour, but his security badge still glowed green when he tapped it against the reader. He locked the door behind him and rushed to his computer, his hands trembling with fury. She wants to play games, he muttered to himself, ripping a high-capacity flash drive from his briefcase. She wants to take my title and treat me like trash. He bypassed the standard firewalls, using his soon-to-be-revoked administrative override. He bypassed the financial records and dug straight into the encrypted files containing my private ventures. He found exactly what he was looking for. Project Horizon. It was the master file for my upcoming multi-million-dollar real estate development, the crown jewel of my future empire. The file contained proprietary architectural blueprints, secured zoning permits, and the confidential list of international private investors backing the project. Preston plugged in this flash drive, watching the progress bar slowly fill as he stole the highly classified documents. He grinned a sickening, hateful smile. He was going to take this drive straight to my absolute biggest corporate rival. He was going to sell my blueprints, sabotage my investors, and sit back while my entire empire burned to the ground. Preston watched the green progress bar inch closer to 100%, 98, 99, 100. The notification chimed, signaling the transfer was complete. He reached out to yank the silver flash drive from the port, his mind already calculating the massive payout he would receive from my top competitor. Before his fingers could even graze the metal, the entire computer monitor blinked, then went pitch black. A sharp, mechanical click echoed through the empty executive suite as the heavy glass door locked, automatically sealing him inside. Did you really think a woman who just bought out Vanguard Financial would leave her multi-million-dollar proprietary blueprints sitting on an unsecured local server, Preston? My voice sliced through the silence of the dimly lit room. I stepped out from the shadows of the adjoining private conference space, holding a sleek tablet in my hand. I had been standing there the entire time, watching him through the reinforced glass partition. Preston whipped around his face, draining of color as he scrambled backward, knocking over a leather guest chair. Maya, he stammered, his eyes darting frantically toward the locked door. I was just retrieving some personal files before IT revoked my access. I have a right to my own client notes. I tapped the screen of my tablet. A massive digital display illuminated on the wall behind my desk, projecting the exact code he had just downloaded. You did not download your client notes, I stated coldly, stepping fully into the light. You downloaded a honeypot file. It is a decoy packet embedded with military-grade tracking software. The moment you plugged that flash drive into this network, my cybersecurity team was alerted. You just committed corporate espionage on camera and left a digital fingerprint that will guarantee you spend the next 10 years in federal prison. Preston stared at the massive screen, his chest heaving as the reality of his situation crashed down on him. The corporate white savior facade he had worn so perfectly for the past 5 years, completely fractured. He was cornered with absolutely no way out. The panic in his eyes instantly morphed into something incredibly ugly. Raw, unadulterated venom. He let out a sharp, vicious laugh, running a shaking hand through his expensive hair. He stopped backing away and stepped toward me, his posture aggressive and highly threatening. You think you are so smart? He sneered, his voice dripping with absolute disgust. You think because you wear a nice suit and bought a few buildings you actually belong in this world. You do not belong here, Maya. None of you do. Your entire family is a complete joke. I stood my ground, holding his furious gaze. Go on, Preston, I challenged him. Tell me how you really feel. Let it all out. He sneered, kicking the fallen chair out of his way. I will gladly tell you. I have spent years playing the perfect husband to that brainless sister of yours. Do you know how exhausting it is to sit at your country club dinners and pretend I respect Marcus and Vivian? Your parents are pathetic, broke parasites. They lease their cars, they max out their credit cards, and they beg me to cover their country club dues just so they can pretend they still have money. They are the definition of fake generational wealth. His face contorted with racist hostility as he closed the distance between us, pointing a finger at my face. I only married Chloe for the PR shield. Do you know how valuable it is in the corporate finance world to have a bougie black wife? It was the ultimate diversity prop. It made my firm look incredibly progressive. I secured 3 massive institutional clients purely because I brought my beautiful elite black wife to the charity galas. She was a human shield against any accusations of privilege or bias. A perfect little accessory to advance my own career. He let out another harsh, grating laugh. But I had to pay for it. God, did I pay for it. I have been secretly funding your parents' fake lifestyle for 2 years. If I stop writing checks, Marcus and Vivian will be homeless by the end of the month. Their entire existence relies on my white guilt and my bank account. They are nothing but leeches bleeding me dry so they can look down on the rest of the world. And you think you can just swoop in and take my job? You think you can demote me after I bought and paid for your entire pathetic family? I looked at him, analyzing the pathetic racist man who had managed to fool my parents and sister for years. He was not a savior. He was a predator who had weaponized his race and wealth to exploit a family, crippled by their own narcissism and status obsession. You are disgusting, Preston, I said, my voice dangerously calm. You used my sister as a corporate prop. You enabled my parents' financial ruin just to maintain power over them. And now you are trying to steal from me because your fragile ego cannot handle working for a black woman. You are damn right I cannot handle it, he screamed, his face turning purple with rage. I will burn this company to the ground before I take orders from you. You are a diversity hire who got lucky. Your whole family is garbage, and Chloe is the dumbest, most gullible accessory I have ever owned. She actually thinks I love her. She actually believes I care about her fake elite lineage. I am going to divorce her the minute I sell these files and leave all of you exactly where you belong, in the gutter. The heavy silence that followed his vile rant was shattered by a sudden, devastating sound. The loud, unmistakable crash of heavy paper bags hitting the polished hardwood floor. Preston froze. He turned his head slowly toward the main entrance of the executive suite. The heavy glass door which my security team had quietly unlocked just moments prior was pushed wide open. Chloe stood trembling in the doorway. She had bypassed the reception desk wanting to surprise her perfect successful husband with a gourmet lunch from his favorite downtown bistro. The expensive takeout bags now lay spilled across the floor, a mess of ruined food and shattered illusions. Her designer sunglasses rested on top of her head, but her eyes were wide with sheer absolute horror. Tears were already streaming down her perfectly contoured face, ruining her expensive makeup. Her hands shook violently as she stared at the man she had worshipped, the man our parents had elevated above their own flesh and blood. She had heard every single cruel word perfectly clearly. Chloe stepped over the spilled gourmet salad and crushed macarons. Her designer heels crunched loudly on the debris. Preston instantly changed his posture. The vicious, red-faced racist from 10 seconds ago vanished, completely replaced by a panicked, cornered animal. He reached his hands out toward his wife, opening his mouth to formulate a lie, but Chloe marched right past him. She marched straight up to my desk and slammed her hands down on the mahogany surface. Her eyes burned with an unhinged, delusional fury directed entirely at me. "You set him up!" Chloe shrieked, her voice echoing off the glass walls of the executive suite. "You recorded him and provoked him until he lost his temper. How long have you been planning this, Maya? Did you buy this entire company just to trap my husband and destroy my marriage?" I stared at my sister in absolute disbelief. The man she slept next to every night had just confessed to using her as a corporate diversity prop. He had just called our entire bloodline parasitic leeches. Yet her extreme narcissism completely blocked out his vile words. Her brain literally could not process the fact that her perfect white finance husband despised her and used her for social capital. So she redirected all her venom toward the family scapegoat. "Did you hit your head when you walked through that door, Chloe?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low. "Your husband just admitted he hates you. He just tried to steal my proprietary architectural blueprints to sell to a rival developer. He called you a dumb, gullible accessory, and you are standing here yelling at me." "You are just jealous!" Chloe screamed, tears of pure rage streaming down her face. "You have always been jealous of me. You are a bitter, lonely woman who cannot stand the fact that I secured a top-tier successful white husband, while you have nothing but your cold, empty bank accounts. You orchestrated this whole setup because you want what I have. You probably flirted with him to make him say those things. You want to ruin my perfect life so I end up just as miserable as you." Preston, realizing that his wife was actually defending him, puffed his chest out again. He stepped up beside Chloe, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder, playing the victim. "See what I have to deal with, Chloe," he said smoothly. "Your sister is unstable. She locked me in here and started making wild accusations about my portfolio. I was just trying to leave and she attacked me. Before I could signal my security team to haul them both out, a commotion erupted in the outer hallway. Marcus and Vivian shoved past my executive assistant, completely ignoring her protests. They burst into the office out of breath and frantic. Chloe must have texted them on her way up, planning a triumphant family lunch that had now turned into a war zone. Vivian took one look at Chloe, crying, and immediately wrapped her arms around her golden child. "What did you do to your sister, Maya?" Vivian demanded, her eyes flashing with hostility. "I told Marcus it was a mistake to let you run a financial firm. You do not know how to separate your petty childhood jealousy from real business." "I did not do anything except catch your precious son-in-law committing federal corporate espionage," I fired back, pointing at the massive digital screen still displaying the honeypot file Preston had attempted to download. "He tried to steal the blueprints for my new commercial development. He also just finished calling our family a bunch of broke fake parasites who only exist to make him look progressive to his elite investors." Marcus waved his hand dismissively, not even glancing at the evidence on the screen. He puffed out his chest, attempting to project the patriarchal authority he had lost long ago. "Now listen to me, Maya. We are not going to ruin this family over a minor professional misunderstanding. Preston is a highly respected vice president. If you file any sort of charges or fire him, it will create a massive public scandal. The media will eat this up. Our friends at the country club and your mother network at the links will be completely humiliated. We will be a laughingstock in high society." Vivian nodded vigorously, stepping forward to reinforce his delusion. "You have more money than you know what to do with, Maya. You do not need this one real estate project. Give the blueprints to Preston. Let him take the project to his investors and build it under his own name. It will secure his promotion, save Chloe marriage, and keep our family reputation completely spotless. You owe us this much after the stunt you pulled at the charity gala last week. I looked at the four of them standing together. My parents were actually demanding that I hand over a multi-million-dollar real estate development to the racist thief who had just degraded our entire bloodline, all to protect the fragile ego of their golden child and maintain their fake high society image. The sheer breathtaking audacity of their demand extinguished whatever tiny lingering shred of familial obligation I had left. I pressed the silent alarm button under my desk. I owe you absolutely nothing, I stated, my voice echoing with absolute finality. I am not your scapegoat anymore. I am not the safety net for your pathetic fabricated lives. The heavy glass doors swung open, and four large, heavily armed corporate security guards stepped into the office. Escort this man out of my building, I ordered, pointing directly at Preston. Confiscate his briefcase, his phone, and his security badge. If he resists, call the police and hold him for corporate theft. Preston's eyes went wide with sheer panic as two guards grabbed him by the arms, hauling him forcefully toward the door. He struggled, his expensive dress shoes slipping on the polished hardwood floor. Chloe screamed, grabbing onto his sleeve, but a third guard gently but firmly separated her from him. Marcus stepped forward, his face red with indignation. "You cannot do this!" Marcus yelled, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You are destroying this family. Do you know what this will do to us? Do you know what you are throwing away?" Preston, thrashing against the guards as they dragged him into the hallway, suddenly stopped fighting. His panic morphed into a manic, unhinged laughter that chilled the entire room. He stared at Marcus, his face twisted in a sneer of pure, unfiltered malice. "You broke frauds!" Preston screamed, his voice carrying down the entire executive floor for every single employee to hear. "You stand there pretending you have power. I am the only reason your mansion has not been foreclosed. I have been paying your mortgage for 2 years. Without my paycheck, the bank is going to throw you and your fake luxury cars out onto the street by the end of the month. Good luck keeping your country club friends when you are homeless, Marcus." The guards yanked Preston around the corner, his manic laughter fading down the corridor. I watched my father face drain of all color, his jaw slacking as the ultimate secret he had buried for years was just broadcasted to the entire world. The silence on the executive floor was absolute. Dozens of my employees stood frozen at their desks, processing the bombshell Preston just dropped. Marcus stumbled backward, his hand clutching his chest, as if he had been physically struck by a freight train. Vivian stared at him, her perfectly glossed lips trembling uncontrollably. "Is it true?" Vivian whispered, her voice cracking under the heavy weight of her collapsing reality. "Have you been taking money from him all this time?" Marcus could not even look her in the eye. His pathetic silence was a deafening confession. Chloe sank to her knees right there in the middle of my office, sobbing hysterically into her designer handbag. The perfect bougie black family built entirely on the backs of white guilt and fraudulent credit limits was completely exposed for everyone to see. I looked at the three of them, shattered and pathetic, on my floor. I pressed the intercom button on my large mahogany desk. "Security, escort these 3 non-employees out of the building right now. If they resist in any way, call the local precinct and have them arrested for trespassing." The descent was incredibly rapid and brutal. Without Preston funneling his Vanguard salary into their offshore accounts, Marcus and Vivian hit a financial brick wall at 200 miles an hour. Within days, Preston served Chloe with divorce papers citing irreconcilable differences and freezing all their joint marital assets. He ruthlessly cut off the life support to my parents' mansion. The truth bled through the elite African-American social circles of the city like a highly toxic spill. "You cannot hide bankruptcy in a community where everyone knows everyone else." Accountant Vivian attempted to use her platinum credit card at a high-profile charity luncheon for the Lynx a week later. The card declined instantly. She tried another one. It also declined. The whispers started immediately spreading from table to table like wildfire. I received updates from my own network, watching from the top floor of my empire as their fake kingdom burned to ash. They had lived beyond their means for decades, relying on predatory loans, second mortgages, and ultimately selling their golden child to a racist corporate climber just to keep up appearances. Now the bank was finally calling in their massive debts. Foreclosure notices were taped directly to the massive mahogany front doors of the estate they loved so much. Vivian tried desperately to maintain her fading social standing. She showed up at the country club assuming my staff would not actually enforce her ban. She walked into the main dining hall attempting to greet the wives of local judges and prominent surgeons. The women literally turned their backs to her, refusing to acknowledge her presence. One prominent board member, a woman Vivian used to gossip with loudly, instructed the waiter to move her table away from the lingering stench of insolvency. Mr. Sterling, my loyal general manager, personally escorted Vivian off the property, threatening her with a trespassing charge if she ever stepped foot on my manicured grass again. Marcus fared no better. He tried to secure emergency bridge loans from his old fraternity brothers and elite business associates. They all blocked his phone number. He was a rapidly sinking ship, and nobody in the black elite wanted to be pulled under with him. They were entirely isolated, stripped of the fake wealth that made them feel superior to everyone else. Their luxury leased cars were repossessed in the middle of the night, leaving empty driveways. Their household staff quit immediately due to unpaid wages, leaving the massive mansion gathering dust and unpaid utility bills. It was a torrential Tuesday night, exactly 3 weeks after the incident in my office. I was sitting in my penthouse overlooking the glowing city skyline, reviewing expansion plans for my new commercial district. The rain lashed heavily against the floor-to-ceiling windows, a fierce storm washing the city clean. My private intercom buzzed sharply, cutting through the soft jazz playing in the background. My head of security spoke through the speaker. "Ms. Maya, your parents are at the ground floor lobby." The concierge tried to turn them away, but they are stubbornly refusing to leave the building premises. They are completely soaked and requesting just 5 short minutes of your valuable time. I stared at the glowing city lights below, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my herbal tea. "Send them up," I commanded. The private elevator chimed exactly 2 minutes later. The heavy metal doors slid open, revealing a sight I never thought I would witness. Marcus and Vivian stepped into my marble foyer. They were drenched to the bone, their expensive coats heavy with freezing rainwater. Vivian's hair was plastered to her face, her expensive makeup running in dark tracks down her cheeks, completely ruining her pristine image. Marcus looked entirely defeated, his shoulders slumped, his proud chest caved in. They looked like drowned rats shivering in the cold air conditioning of my luxury penthouse. They stood there dripping water onto my imported rugs, completely stripped of their arrogance and their false pride. Marcus took a tentative step forward, his voice completely devoid of its usual booming authority. "Maya," he rasped, his hands shaking visibly at his sides as he looked around my stunning home with an expression of complete and utter despair on his face. "We have nowhere else to go. The bank is finalizing the foreclosure tomorrow morning. They are going to take the house, Maya. They are going to take absolutely everything we have left." Vivian stepped up beside him, hot tears mixing with the cold rain on her face. "Please, Maya," Vivian begged, her voice breaking into a pathetic, desperate sob. "You cannot let the bank take the estate. It is our home. It is the family historic legacy. You have more money than you could ever possibly spend in 10 lifetimes. Please buy the mansion from the bank and protect your family historic legacy." I stared at the two of them kneeling and shivering on my custom-imported rugs. The sheer audacity of Vivian invoking the concept of a historic family legacy made my blood boil. They had no legacy. They only had a mountain of fabricated wealth built on predatory loans and an obsession with impressing people who actively despised them. I walked slowly over to my massive mahogany desk, leaving them dripping freezing rainwater onto the marble floor. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. I walked back to the center of the room and tossed the envelope onto the glass coffee table right in front of my weeping parents. The heavy thud of the paper hitting the glass echoed loudly over the sound of the rain lashing against my windows. "Open it!" I commanded, my voice entirely stripped of any warmth or sympathy. "Take a good look at your precious historic legacy." Marcus hesitated, his hands shaking violently as he reached for the envelope. He pulled out a massive stack of official banking records, highlighted and annotated by my elite team of forensic accountants. Vivian leaned over his shoulder, her fake eyelashes completely ruined as she squinted at the documents. The color immediately drained from whatever was left of Marcus' face. He recognized the bank letterhead instantly. "You hacked our private financial records," Marcus stammered, attempting to summon a sliver of his old patriarchal outrage but failing completely. "I own the financial institution that holds your primary accounts," Marcus, I stated flatly, looking down at him. "When you acquired Vanguard, you also acquired its subsidiary banking arms. I own your debt. I own every single piece of paper documenting exactly how you destroyed your own lives. And I know exactly why the bank is foreclosing on that mansion tomorrow morning." Vivian swallowed hard, wrapping her wet coat tighter around her shivering shoulders. "We just had a run of bad luck, Maya. The market turned against us. It was out of our control." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh that cut right through her pathetic lie. "A run of bad luck, Vivian. Is that what you call a second mortgage? Let us look at page 4 of that stack, Marcus. Read the date aloud for me." Marcus kept his mouth shut, staring at the floor. "I will read it for you," then I said, taking a step closer. "You took out a massive second mortgage on the family estate exactly 3 years ago. You pulled out nearly $500,000 in liquid equity. Now, what kind of devastating family emergency required that much cash? Let me check the ledger. Ah, yes. You spent $120,000 buying Chloe a brand new custom Porsche for her birthday because Preston told you she needed to arrive at the country club looking like old money." Vivian flinched as if I had physically struck her. "She needed reliable transportation, Maya. She was marrying into a very prominent white family. We had to maintain our social standing." "You maintained your social standing by mortgaging the roof over your head," I fired back. "And that is not even the worst part. You took the remaining $300,000 and handed it directly to Preston to seed his fake boutique crypto fund. You funded a racist, arrogant finance bro who lost every single penny of your money in less than 6 months. You literally gave away your home to a man who despised you just so he would let Chloe sit at his dinner table." Marcus finally looked up, tears of humiliation streaming down his face. "He promised us a massive return, Maya. He promised us he would triple the investment and pay off the house completely. We were trying to build generational wealth. We were trying to secure a future for this family." "You do not care about this family, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You only care about the golden child. Do you remember what happened exactly 10 years ago when I was 20 years old? Do you remember when I was lying in a hospital bed recovering from a severe infection with no health insurance? The hospital handed me a bill for $40,000. I came to you begging for help. I was terrified. I was drowning in medical debt before my life had even started. Do you remember what you told me?" Marcus looked away, his silence serving as a devastating confirmation. "You told me you were completely broke." I continued, forcing him to hear the truth. "You told me I needed to learn financial responsibility and that bailing me out would ruin your retirement plans. You left your own daughter to be hounded by debt collectors for 5 years. I worked 3 jobs while going to school just to pay off those medical bills. Meanwhile, you were sitting on millions of dollars in home equity. Equity you gladly set on fire the minute Chloe wanted a luxury sports car and her worthless husband wanted to play venture capitalist." Vivian burst into a fresh wave of hysterical sobs, grabbing the hem of my designer slacks. "We were wrong, Maya. We were so incredibly wrong. Please, you have to forgive us. We are your blood. We are your parents. If the bank takes the house tomorrow, we will be out on the street. We will have absolutely nothing left. You are our only hope." I stood there looking at the two people who had subjected me to a lifetime of emotional abuse, financial neglect, and blatant favoritism. They were begging for their lives, stripped of all their arrogant bougie pride. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath and letting my shoulders slump slightly. I let my expression soften, orchestrating a perfect mask of reluctant familial obligation. "Get up," I said softly, stepping back from Vivian's grasp. "Just get up off the floor." Marcus and Vivian slowly scrambled to their feet, shivering and desperate. They watched me with wide, terrified eyes like dogs waiting for a scrap of meat to fall from the table. "I cannot believe I am doing this. I sighed, rubbing my temples as if I were truly conflicted. I walked over to my desk and picked up my secure business phone. I dialed the direct line to the president of the commercial banking division, holding the phone to my ear so they could clearly hear me. "Yes, this is Maya," I said, speaking crisply into the receiver. "The foreclosure proceedings scheduled for tomorrow morning on the Oak Ridge estate. Halt them immediately. I am personally clearing the debt. Draft the payoff check from my private holdings account and send the confirmation to my legal team. Yes, the entire remaining balance. Thank you." I hung up the phone and placed it gently back onto the mahogany desk. I looked over at Marcus and Vivian. "It is done," I said, my voice laced with a heavy manufactured exhaustion. "The bank will not take the house tomorrow. I am clearing the debt completely." The transformation was instantaneous. The sheer desperate terror on Vivian's face vanished, completely replaced by a blinding, radiant relief. She let out a loud, dramatic gasp, covering her mouth with her hands. Marcus actually fell back against the wall, letting out a massive breath he had been holding for weeks. The heavy, crushing weight of their financial ruin had just been magically lifted by the very daughter they had discarded. "Oh, my beautiful, amazing girl!" Vivian cried out, taking a step toward me. "I knew you would not abandon us. I knew you had a good heart." I held up my hand, stopping her in her tracks. "I am not doing this for hugs, Vivian. I am doing this because I am exhausted, and I want this nightmare to be over. Just go home. Get out of my penthouse and go back to your mansion." Marcus nodded vigorously, grabbing Vivian by the arm. "Thank you, Maya. You have saved this family. You will not regret this, I promise you." They turned around and hurried back toward the private elevator, eager to escape my presence and return to their luxurious delusion. I stood perfectly still, watching their reflections in the dark glass of my floor-to-ceiling windows. As they waited for the elevator doors to open, Marcus pulled Vivian into a tight, victorious hug. In the quiet of the penthouse, I could hear everything. "I told you she would cave," Marcus whispered into Vivian's ear, a smug, arrogant smile spreading across his face. "She is too weak. She always wants to be the savior." Vivian smirked, whispering back with absolute venom. "Dumb scapegoat. She practically handed us a free house. We just have to play nice until the paperwork clears." The elevator chimed and the heavy metal doors slid open. They broke apart, arranging their faces back into masks of humble gratitude before turning to look at me one last time. "We love you, Maya," Vivian called out sweetly as they stepped into the elevator. I smiled, a wide, brilliant, predatory smile that did not reach my eyes. "I love you too," I replied cheerfully. "I will send my legal team over to your house next week to finalize the paperwork. Have a safe drive home." The elevator doors slid shut, sealing them inside their temporary victory. The moment the numbers above the door began to descend, my cheerful smile vanished entirely, replaced by a look of pure cold calculation. They actually believed they had won. They actually thought they had manipulated me one last time. I walked over to the glass table, picked up the bank records, and dropped them into the shredder. They were completely clueless about what signing that specific paperwork next week actually meant. The trap was set, and they had walked right into it. It took less than 1 week for my parents to revert to their true parasitic nature. The ink on the bank transfer authorization had not even dried before Marcus and Vivian opened 3 new high-interest credit lines to fund the most extravagant garden party our elite neighborhood had seen all season. They needed to quickly squash the rampant rumors of their bankruptcy circulating through the local country club and Vivian prominent social circles. The massive manicured lawns of the family estate were transformed into a sickening display of fabricated generational wealth. They hired a 50-piece string orchestra, imported thousands of rare white orchids, and secured a Michelin-starred catering team. It was a desperate, pathetic illusion designed to prove to their judgmental friends that they were still sitting comfortably at the top of the social hierarchy. Chloe paraded around the towering champagne fountain, wearing a brand-new designer gown she certainly could not afford. She was completely bankrupt, and her racist husband Preston was currently finalizing their bitter divorce while facing federal espionage charges. Yet she stood there smiling brightly, lying through her teeth to the wives of local judges and wealthy surgeons. She waved her bare left hand, claiming Preston was simply away on a highly exclusive business trip in London. Vivian held court near the grand gazebo, dripping in diamonds, likely purchased on a desperate installment plan. I could hear her sharp voice carrying over the classical music as she bragged to her fellow board members. "I heard about those nasty foreclosure rumors." Vivian laughed, waving her hand dismissively at a nosy neighbor. "Pure jealousy, darling. In fact, our portfolio is expanding. My girls are just so incredibly successful." Maya learned everything she knows about real estate from Marcus. We taught her the value of aggressive investing. She was loudly taking full credit for my financial success, spinning a glorious narrative where the family was stronger than ever. She was completely hiding the fact that just days ago, she was shivering and sobbing on my penthouse floor, begging me to save them from imminent homelessness. They expected me to arrive tonight in a lavish gown, ready to play the role of the dutiful, obedient daughter who had finally learned her place. They expected me to stand quietly in the background, letting them use my billionaire status as a shiny prop for their endless social climbing. Instead, I arrived exactly as what I was: a ruthless corporate predator executing a hostile takeover. I bypassed the valet stand, completely ordering my armored SUV to park directly in front of the grand marble staircase blocking the entrance. I stepped out wearing a razor-sharp charcoal pinstripe business suit. I was not alone. I was flanked by three high-powered corporate attorneys carrying heavy leather briefcases and my personal head of security. As I marched across the pristine lawn, the string orchestra faltered. The music awkwardly died away, from a joyous celebration to a tense, suffocating silence. Whispers immediately broke out among the socialites as they recognized me from the charity gala. They knew exactly who I was now. I was the woman who had ruthlessly acquired Vanguard Financial and crushed anyone who stood in my way. Marcus saw me approaching, and his face immediately tightened with sheer panic. He quickly masked it with a booming fake laugh, grabbing a silver spoon to loudly clink against his crystal champagne flute. He stepped up onto the elevated stone patio, desperate to control the narrative before I could open my mouth. "Friends and esteemed guests," Marcus announced, his voice projecting across the silent garden. "Please raise a glass to my eldest daughter, Maya. She has recently expanded her impressive business portfolio, applying all the invaluable lessons her mother and I taught her about building generational wealth. She is a shining example of our historic family legacy. Come up here, Maya. Come say a few words about the power of family unity." He reached his hand out toward me, his eyes silently pleading with me to play along and protect their fragile facade. He actually thought I came here to validate his lies. He thought my silence over the past week was compliance. I walked up the stone steps, my custom leather heels clicking sharply against the pavement. I ignored his outstretched hand, entirely refusing the microphone. I simply snapped my fingers. My lead attorney stepped forward, unzipping his heavy leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick red folder stamped with official county seals and handed it directly to me. I looked at Vivian, whose fake smile was currently trembling with terror as she realized the cameras of her elite friends were recording every second of this interaction. I looked at Chloe, who was backing away into the crowd, hiding her face. Then I turned my attention back to Marcus. I slapped the heavy red folder directly onto his chest, forcing him to grab it before it fell. "Let us clarify the truth about your historic family legacy, Marcus," I said, my voice carrying clearly and coldly through the dead silent garden so every single elite guest could hear the brutal reality. "You mortgaged this property to buy sports cars and fund a racist white fraud. You let your own daughter drown in debt while you played pretend in high society." Marcus opened the folder, his hands shaking violently as he read the top page. The color completely drained from his face. "I did not pay your mortgage, Marcus," I stated. My eyes locked onto his terrified gaze. "I bought the foreclosed deed directly from the bank. I own this estate now." The collective gasp from the elite garden party attendees swept over the manicured lawn like a sudden winter chill. The string orchestra members completely lowered their instruments, staring wide-eyed at the unfolding drama. Marcus stood paralyzed on the elevated stone patio, clutching the heavy red folder against his chest, as if it were a physical shield. His jaw moved up and down, but no actual sound came out. The pristine image of his immense generational wealth had just been entirely incinerated in front of the exact people he spent his entire life trying to impress. I did not give him a single second to recover from the massive shock. I snapped my fingers again, breaking the heavy silence. My lead corporate attorney stepped forward and retrieved a crisp legal document from his leather briefcase. He handed it directly to me. I walked over to the elaborate champagne fountain and slapped the stark white paper down onto the marble table right next to a tray of expensive caviar. This is a standard month-to-month lease agreement. Marcus, I announced, my voice echoing clearly through the silent garden. Since I am now the sole owner of this property, I am offering you the opportunity to remain as my tenants. You can stay in my house, but rent is $15,000 a month, payable immediately upon signing. You have exactly 60 seconds to sign that contract, or you have 30 days to vacate my property. The garden erupted into frantic whispers. Prominent judges, local politicians, and wealthy surgeons began backing away from the patio, eager to distance themselves from the radioactive stench of poverty. Chloe broke through the crowd, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. She marched up the stone steps, her designer heels stomping aggressively against the pavement. "You are a monster," Chloe screamed, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "You are an absolute monster, Maya. You drove away my husband and ruined my perfect marriage, and now you want to throw us out onto the street. You have millions of dollars. You do not even need this house. You are just doing this to torture us because you have always been a bitter, jealous loser who wants to destroy my happiness." I looked at my sister, completely unfazed by her hysterical screaming. "I am charging market rent for a luxury estate." "Chloe," I replied smoothly, "if you cannot afford to live in a mansion, you should probably start looking for a small apartment on the other side of town right now." Hearing the phrase "small apartment" triggered a massive psychological break in my mother. Vivian realized her elite friends were actively whispering about her rapid descent into severe poverty, desperate to regain control of the narrative and paint me as the villain. Vivian clutched her chest. She let out a loud, dramatic gasp and swayed dangerously on her expensive heels. "I cannot breathe!" Vivian wailed dramatically, collapsing onto a nearby wrought iron patio chair. "My heart. Marcus, my heart is failing. The stress is killing me. Someone please help a dying mother." Several guests gasped, but nobody stepped forward to help her. I stared at Vivian, watching her fake her medical emergency with the theatrical flair of a desperate soap opera actress. I did not move a single muscle to assist her. "Call an ambulance immediately," I commanded my head of security, my tone completely flat and bored. "Tell the paramedics my mother is experiencing a severe cardiac event. Ensure they take her to the county public hospital downtown, since she no longer has the premium private health insurance to cover a luxury clinic stay." Miraculously, Vivian, breathing, instantly stabilized. She sat up straight in the wrought iron chair, her fake panic attack completely cured by the horrifying threat of being treated at a public facility. She glared at me, her eyes burning with pure venom. "You are a cruel, heartless child," Vivian spat, adjusting her expensive necklace. Marcus, having finally recovered his voice, stepped forward and placed himself protectively in front of Vivian and Chloe. His face was a dark, dangerous shade of purple. He threw the heavy red folder onto the marble table next to the lease agreement, refusing to pick up the silver pen. "You think you have outsmarted us?" Maya, Marcus growled, his voice vibrating with absolute fury. "You think you can swoop in here and extort your own family in front of our friends? I will not sign a single piece of paper. You are engaging in illegal predatory behavior. I have the best lawyers in the city on speed dial. I will drag you into civil court for aggressive financial coercion, and I will tie this property up in endless litigation for years. We will see you in court. Maya and I will make sure the judge strips you of every single asset you own." I smiled. It was a cold, calculating smile that made Marcus take a hesitant step backward. I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored charcoal suit jacket and pulled out my smartphone. I opened my audio files and turned the media volume all the way up so the entire garden could hear. "You want to go to court?" Marcus, I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Are you absolutely certain you want to invite lawyers and judges to dig into your financial history? Let us review some evidence before you make that call." I pressed play on the screen. The crisp, clear audio recording of my father's voice echoed loudly across the stone patio. The audio played his exact words from our previous argument. We needed that money for a family emergency. You took the $50,000 grandmother left for my tuition to pay for Chloe's wedding. I paused the audio recording. Sue me, I challenged him, my voice dropping to a sharp, dangerous whisper. Sue me, Marcus, and this audio recording goes straight to the district attorney for felony fraud. The recording echoed through the manicured garden one final time before I slipped my phone back into my tailored suit pocket. Marcus stumbled backward, knocking over a crystal champagne flute that shattered against the stone patio. All the bluster, all the patriarchal authority he had weaponized against me for 32 years completely evaporated. He looked like a deflated balloon. The remaining elite guests, who had lingered to watch the spectacle, finally broke. A prominent local judge grabbed his wife by the arm and hurried toward the valet stand without saying a single word. The wealthy surgeons, corporate executives, and country club board members scattered like cockroaches fleeing a sudden bright light. Nobody wanted to be caught in the blast radius of a felony fraud investigation. They abandoned their half-eaten caviar and abandoned my parents completely. I stepped closer to the marble table where the lease agreement still sat untouched. I tapped my manicured fingernail against the crisp white paper. You have exactly 30 days to pack up your fraudulent lives and vacate my property. I announced, my voice echoing across the now empty garden. If you are still inside these walls by midnight on day 30, I will have you physically removed. And Marcus, if a single fixture is damaged or stolen on your way out, that audio file goes straight to the authorities. I turned my back on their stunned, horrifying silence and walked toward my armored SUV. My corporate attorneys and security detail followed in perfect synchronization. I did not look back even as Chloe began to scream hysterically into the empty, sprawling yard. By the next morning, the retaliation campaign began. Vivian, having lost her wealth, her country club access, and her dignity, decided her only remaining currency was victimhood. She launched a massive, relentless community and online smear campaign against me. She utilized every single elite African-American social network she had ever clawed her way into. She posted tearful, highly edited videos on social media, claiming I was a sociopath who had violently stolen the family estate through predatory legal loopholes. Chloe chimed in, immediately writing long, agonizing posts about how my extreme jealousy over her marriage had driven me to bankrupt our aging parents. They tagged local community leaders, church pastors, and influential members of the Lynx. They painted a devastating portrait of an ungrateful, evil daughter who turned her back on the very people who sacrificed everything to raise her. My phone blew up with notifications. Distant cousins I had not spoken to in a decade sent me vicious messages accusing me of destroying the family legacy. Local community bloggers picked up the story, framing it as a tragic tale of corporate greed destroying a prominent Black family. But I knew the first rule of power: never interrupt your enemy when they are making a mistake. I remained completely and utterly silent publicly. I released no statements. I disabled comments on my professional social media accounts. I instructed my public relations team to ignore every single inquiry from local gossip sites. Let Vivian scream into the void. Let Chloe play the victim. Their loud, desperate noise was the perfect cover for my actual counterattack. While they spent 24 hours a day managing their fake online tragedy, I was locked in the boardroom on the 50th floor of Vanguard Financial. I took the exact proprietary architectural blueprints that Preston had attempted to steal and sell to my rivals. I polished them, optimized the commercial zoning permits, and brought them directly to a consortium of international private investors. I walked into a room full of elite global financiers and laid out a multi-billion-dollar urban revitalization project. I showed them how my new commercial district would completely redefine the city economic infrastructure. I leveraged the sheer aggressive momentum of my Vanguard acquisition to prove I was the apex predator in the market. The investors were absolutely mesmerized. The very project Preston tried to use to destroy me became the catalyst for my greatest victory. Within 3 weeks, I closed the absolute biggest real estate deal of the decade. The contracts were signed, the massive funds were secured, and my corporate empire effectively quadrupled in value. I made the front cover of national financial magazines. The headlines praised my ruthless efficiency and visionary market strategy. Vivian local smear campaign was instantly drowned out by global recognition of my staggering financial dominance. The people who had believed her pathetic online videos suddenly felt very foolish for betting against a billionaire mogul. The calendar pages ripped away with brutal speed. My parents ignored the formal eviction notices my legal team sent via certified mail. They ignored the text messages from my property management firm outlining the move-out protocols. They were living in a deep, profound state of narcissistic delusion. They genuinely believed that I was playing a game of chicken. Day 29 arrived with a thick, oppressive humidity settling over the city. I sat at my massive mahogany desk, watching the digital clock on my monitor tick closer to midnight. My lead security director stood patiently by the door, holding a detailed tactical extraction plan. I had sent a scout team to observe the perimeter of the estate earlier that afternoon. The report they brought back was staggering. Marcus and Vivian had not packed a single box. They had not rented a moving truck. They had not even taken the family portraits off the massive living room walls. Chloe was currently lounging by the custom infinity pool, mindlessly scrolling through social media on her phone. They actually believed that because we shared blood, I would ultimately fold. They thought the biological bond would be a magic shield that would protect them from the harsh, brutal consequences of their own horrific actions. They told themselves that deep down, I was still the desperate people-pleasing scapegoat who just wanted her parents to love her. They thought I would never actually pull the trigger on my own blood. They were dead wrong. The morning of day 30 broke with a bright sun glaring down on the sprawling Oak Ridge estate. I monitored the operation from my Vanguard office. I did not drive down to the property. I refused to give Marcus and Vivian the satisfaction of a final showdown. They wanted a screaming match so they could twist my words and play the victims. Instead, I sent the cold, unfeeling arm of the law. At exactly 8 in the morning, while Vivian was likely sipping her espresso and waiting for me to arrive with a fresh set of compromises, diesel engines shattered the quiet neighborhood. 4 moving trucks rolled up the driveway accompanied by 3 sheriff cruisers. Flashing lights illuminated the manicured landscaping, drawing attention from nosy neighbors. The heavy wooden front doors of the mansion swung open. Marcus stepped out onto the grand stone porch, wearing a silk robe, his face morphing into arrogant outrage. Vivian and Chloe crowded behind him in panic. The lead officer stepped out of the cruiser, adjusting his utility belt. It was the same officer Preston attempted to intimidate at the country club. The sheriff remembered them perfectly. He marched up the stone steps holding a thick clipboard, his expression devoid of mercy. "What is the meaning of this?" Marcus bellowed, attempting to summon his patriarchal authority. "You are trespassing on private property. I demand you remove these trucks before I call the mayor." The sheriff forcefully shoved the clipboard right into Marcus' chest. "You do not own this property, sir," the sheriff stated, his voice echoing across the front lawn. "This is a court-ordered eviction mandate authorized by the absolute owner of this estate. You were given 30 days to vacate the premises. Your time expired at midnight. Step aside or you will be arrested for trespassing." Marcus' mouth opened and closed soundlessly as he stared at the official seal on the eviction notice. The delusion finally cracked. The reality of their ruin hit him with the force of a blow. "Move," the sheriff commanded, signaling to his deputies and the fleet of movers standing by. "Clear the property entirely. Do not let them take anything that belongs to the estate fixtures." The crew surged forward like a well-oiled machine, ignoring Vivian's shrieks. "You cannot do this!" Vivian wailed, clutching her robe as 2 deputies guided her down the front steps and onto the damp grass. "We are a prominent family. You are humiliating us." The sheriff stared her down. "You humiliated yourselves, ma'am. Now stay off the porch." The brutality of the eviction was breathtaking to watch through the security feeds. The movers did not care about the prestige of the family belongings. They worked with ruthless efficiency. Within minutes, the velvet sofas Vivian bragged about were hauled out the front door and dumped onto the front lawn. Marcus' mahogany desk was dragged across the threshold. Then came Chloe's room. Chloe ran wildly across the grass, screaming at the top of her lungs as movers began carrying out her extensive designer wardrobe. Boxes of expensive shoes and racks of high-end dresses were dropped onto the lawn. A box tipped over, spilling a dozen pairs of red-bottom heels onto the dirt. "Careful, you idiots!" Chloe shrieked, dropping to her knees in the grass to frantically gather her scattered shoes. She tried to polish them with her bare hands. "Those cost more than your miserable lives. My husband will sue all of you." One of the deputies chuckled dryly, shaking his head at her complete disconnect from reality. "Your ex-husband is facing federal charges, lady. I suggest you worry about finding a shelter instead of your fancy shoes." Cars were slowing down on the street. Prominent doctors, high-powered lawyers, and local politicians, the very elite African-American circle my parents had sacrificed my future to impress, were openly staring at the spectacle. They rolled down their luxury car windows, watching the majestic fall of the fake bougie empire. Marcus stood frozen on the lawn, shivering in his robe, entirely stripped of his pride, his wealth, and his fake identity. The mansion was completely hollowed out in less than 2 hours. Every single piece of furniture, every designer bag, every shred of their fake opulence was piled haphazardly on the front lawn like a high-end yard sale. The sheriff locked the heavy front doors, securely engaging the new electronic security system my team had expertly installed. "You are officially evicted," the sheriff announced, turning his back on them. "Do not return under any circumstances." Vivian looked around at the towering pile of belongings and the staring neighbors. Pure panic gripped her chest. She grabbed her smartphone with trembling hands, her long acrylic nails slipping against the screen. "We need somewhere to go." Vivian hyperventilated. "We need a place to hide until we can fix this absolute disaster. I will call the country club. We can stay in the luxury guest suites. We are legacy members. They have to accommodate us." She dialed the main concierge line, her breathing shallow and frantic. The line clicked open. "Oak Ridge Country Club General Management, Mr. Sterling speaking." Vivian gasped in relief. "Mr. Sterling, thank God. It is Vivian. We have had a terrible security emergency at the estate today. I need you to prepare the grand guest suite for me, Marcus and Chloe, immediately. We will be arriving in 30 minutes. Have the staff bring champagne to calm our nerves." A long, heavy silence stretched over the phone line. "Vivian," Mr. Sterling finally replied, his voice dry, flat, and utterly devoid of respect. "I am looking at a security directive issued directly by the sole owner of this establishment. Miss Maya has explicitly banned you, Marcus and Chloe, from the premises for life. If you cross the country club gates, I have strict instructions to have you arrested for trespassing. Have a very pleasant morning today." Vivian let the smartphone slip from her trembling fingers. It fell onto the damp grass next to a discarded pile of designer scarves. The realization that they were permanently exiled from their only remaining sanctuary finally broke her. But while my parents were weeping over their ruined social lives on the front lawn of my newly acquired property, Preston was 300 miles away, orchestrating his own highly delusional comeback. Preston sat comfortably in a leather chair on the 60th floor of a prestigious Wall Street investment firm. He had flown to New York City immediately after I fired him, thoroughly convinced that his race, his gender, and his resume would instantly secure him a new executive position. He was sitting across from Richard Sterling, the ruthless chief executive of Vanguard's biggest corporate rival. Preston crossed his legs, adjusting his custom silk tie, exuding that familiar sickening confidence. He had completely convinced himself that his termination was a minor setback. In his mind, he was still the ultimate financial savior. "Let us be honest," Richard Preston said, offering a slick, practiced smile. "Vanguard is going downhill fast. The new ownership lacks pedigree. She does not understand the nuances of generational wealth management. I built an entire portfolio using my elite connections within the African American high society sector. I brought them unprecedented diversity optics and secured massive institutional capital. But the new management is hostile and entirely uneducated in high-level market strategies. I am willing to bring my entire client roster over to your firm right now for a senior managing director title and a $2 million signing bonus." Richard stared at Preston from across the massive glass desk. He did not return the smile. Instead, he slowly opened a thick leather-bound folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He placed it carefully on the desk, smoothing out the edges. "You are offering me a client roster you no longer have access to," Richard stated, his voice flat and unamused. and you are demanding a signing bonus based on a reputation that was just incinerated less than 20 minutes ago. Preston frowned, his arrogant posture faltering slightly. I do not know what you mean. My reputation is absolutely pristine. Richard tapped the piece of paper. This is a direct notice from the Securities and Exchange Commission. It was blasted across the terminal to every major financial institution in the country this morning. It seems the new owner of Vanguard Financial did not just terminate your employment, Preston. She filed a comprehensive federal complaint against you for corporate espionage and intellectual property theft. Preston's face drained of all color. His heart hammered violently against his ribs. She has no proof, Preston stammered, his voice pitching up in panic. It is a fabricated accusation from a bitter, disgruntled woman who wants to ruin me. Richard turned his laptop screen around so Preston could see the bright, glaring display. My security team had not just submitted a written complaint. I had forwarded the absolute, undeniable proof. The screen showed a highly detailed summary of the honeypot file Preston had downloaded. It displayed his exact IP address, his employee login credentials, and a time-stamped digital fingerprint that traced the stolen data directly to his personal flash drive. She submitted the server logs, the encrypted tracking data, and high-definition security camera footage of you attempting to steal proprietary commercial blueprints. Richard read aloud, his tone dripping with sheer disgust. The Financial Industry Regulatory Authority has officially suspended your Series 7 and Series 63 licenses pending a federal criminal investigation. You are completely stripped of your trading credentials, Preston. You are officially blacklisted from the entire financial sector. Preston could barely breathe. The walls of the luxurious office felt like they were rapidly closing in on him. His entire identity, his wealth, his arrogant superiority was tied directly to those licenses. Without them, he was absolutely nothing. He was just a criminal facing severe federal charges. You are radioactive, Richard continued, pressing a button under his desk to summon building security. You are a massive liability who tried to sell out your own firm because your fragile ego could not handle a change in leadership. I would not hire you to sweep the floors in my lobby. Get out of my office before I call the federal authorities myself to come collect you. Two muscular security guards stepped into the room. Preston did not fight them. He stumbled out of the high-rise building, his mind spinning in sheer, terrifying panic. He pulled out his phone, desperately checking his banking apps and his professional profiles. Every single one was locked or flagged by federal regulators. My counterattack was not just a firing. It was a complete nuclear annihilation of his entire professional existence. 2 days later, the devastation followed Preston straight into the family court mediation room back in my city. He sat across a scarred wooden table from Chloe. My sister looked completely haggard, wearing a wrinkled dress and clutching a cheap disposable coffee cup. She had been bouncing between cheap motels since the eviction, her fantasy life entirely destroyed. But her extreme narcissism was still running on fumes. She glared at Preston, flanked by a remarkably expensive divorce attorney she had hired on a high-interest credit card. I want half of everything, Chloe demanded, her voice shrill and commanding. You used me to get clients, you humiliated my family, and you ruined my life. I want 50% of your Vanguard stock options, your retirement accounts, and $10,000 a month in permanent spousal support. I am not walking away from this marriage empty-handed. I deserve compensation for dealing with your racist lies. Preston looked at the woman he had used as a corporate diversity prop. A week ago, he might have worried about paying her off to keep her quiet. Now he just threw his head back and laughed. It was a dark, unhinged sound that made Chloe flinch in her seat. You want half of everything, Preston sneered, tossing a thin manila envelope across the table. Be my guest, Chloe. Take half. Chloe lawyer opened the envelope, his eyes scanning the documents. The color immediately dropped from the attorney face. He slid the papers over to Chloe, shaking his head slowly, indicating a total loss. Preston leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. My Vanguard stock options are completely voided because I was terminated for cause. My bank accounts are frozen pending a federal investigation by the SEC. I have zero income, zero assets, and I am currently facing massive federal fines for corporate espionage. I am officially unemployed and legally bankrupt. I have absolutely nothing left to give you. Chloe stared at the documents, her hands shaking violently. No, she gasped, dropping the papers onto the floor. "No, you have offshore accounts. You have investments. You have to pay me alimony. I have nothing. I do not even have a house to sleep in tonight." "That sounds like a personal problem." Preston smiled a vicious, hateful grin, showing his true colors one final time. "The judge cannot squeeze blood from a stone. You get zero spousal support, and you get to pay your own massive legal fees. Have a nice life working minimum wage to pay off your credit cards." Preston stood up, buttoning his cheap jacket, and walked right out of the mediation room. He left his golden child wife sitting at the table, completely drowning in debt, utterly destitute, and entirely alone. Chloe sat frozen in the hard wooden chair of the mediation room long after Preston walked out. Her high-priced divorce attorney packed up his leather briefcase without making a single second of eye contact. He handed her an itemized invoice for his massive retainer and told her he would be filing a motion to withdraw as her legal counsel by the end of the business day. He did not care about her tears or her sudden poverty. He only cared about billable hours. He walked out, leaving her entirely alone in the sterile room. Chloe stumbled out of the law office and onto the blistering hot pavement of the city. She pulled out her smartphone, her hands shaking violently. She dialed her best friend, the wife of a prominent local surgeon who had attended her lavish wedding. The call went straight to voicemail. She texted her elite group chat, a circle of wealthy country club daughters she had gossiped with for years. A harsh red notification popped up on her screen. She had been permanently removed from the chat. She tried to call Vivian, but the line was completely disconnected. The toxic whisper network of the black elite had worked with terrifying speed. Every single person in her social circle knew she was utterly bankrupt, discarded by her white savior husband, and carrying the radioactive stench of public humiliation. They dropped her instantly. Chloe had absolutely zero marketable skills. She held a degree in art history that she had never once used, having transitioned directly from her graduation ceremony to playing a trophy wife. Her platinum credit cards were all maxed out or frozen by the bank fraud department. She checked her mobile banking app and saw she had exactly $42 to her name. With her heavy designer suitcases dragging behind her, she was forced to walk away from the towering luxury high-rises of the city center. She walked for hours, her expensive heels blistering her feet, until she reached the grimy industrial outskirts of town. She found herself staring at the Starlight Motel, a depressing two-star establishment with a flickering neon sign and peeling paint on the exterior walls. Desperate for a safe place to sleep, she dragged her luggage into the dingy lobby. The air smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap industrial cleaner. She approached the manager, a gruff, impatient man, who looked at her ruined designer dress with deep suspicion. Chloe begged him for a room, but she could not even afford the cheap weekly rate. Seeing her sheer desperation, the manager offered her a brutal, degrading trade. His night shift receptionist had just walked out. If Chloe agreed to work the front desk for minimum wage, he would let her sleep in a cramped storage room behind the office for free. Chloe, the former golden child and queen of the elite social scene, was forced to accept. She dragged her bags into the windowless storage room and traded her silk blouse for a stiff, scratchy polyester uniform shirt. It was 2 sizes too big and humiliated her to her core. She spent her first few hours being screamed at by disgruntled truckers, weary travelers, and angry guests, complaining about broken ice machines and stained carpets. Every time the lobby bell rang, she flinched violently, praying it was no one she used to know. Her manicured nails chipped and broke as she scrubbed the filthy coffee station. Her feet throbbed in the cheap discount flats she had to purchase from a convenience store across the street. She spent her breaks crying in the supply closet, mourning the fake, lavish life she had so arrogantly flaunted just weeks ago. The humiliation was absolute and suffocating. It was only her 3rd day on the job. The morning sun glared harshly through the dirty glass windows of the motel lobby. Chloe was leaning over the scuffed laminate counter, wiping down the front desk with a damp rag. She heard the distinct sound of heavy tires crunching against the cracked asphalt parking lot. She looked up and completely froze. A fleet of 4 black armored SUVs rolled into the motel parking lot, moving with lethal precision, The heavy glass doors of the lobby swung open. A team of high-powered corporate executives marched in their polished shoes, clicking against the cheap linoleum floor. In the dead center of the formation was Maya. I walked into the motel wearing a sharp-tailored crimson business suit. My presence instantly commanded the dingy room, sucking the air right out of the lobby. I did not look surprised to see my sister standing behind the counter wearing a hideous, oversized polyester uniform. My private investigators had been tracking her spectacular downfall since the minute she left the mediation room. I walked directly up to the front desk, stopping just inches from where she stood. Chloe tried to speak. She opened her mouth to formulate some kind of defense, to scream at me, or to beg for mercy, but her throat was completely dry. Her hands gripped the dirty cleaning rag as she stared at the billionaire mogul she had spent her entire life treating like garbage. I did not say a single word to her. I did not need to. I simply raised my hand and signaled to my lead executive assistant. He stepped forward and slapped a crisp legal document onto the counter right over Chloe's cleaning rag. "We are officially closing this establishment," the assistant announced in a crisp, professional tone that echoed through the quiet lobby. Ms. Maya Commercial Real Estate Division finalized the total acquisition of this property at 6 o'clock this morning. The demolition crew and bulldozers will be arriving on site in exactly 2 hours to tear this building down for our new luxury retail development. You are required to vacate the premises immediately. Chloe's eyes widened in pure terror. She was losing her job and her only shelter in the exact same second. The assistant then pulled a small white envelope from his tailored blazer and dropped it next to the legal eviction notice. "Since you are technically an employee of the newly acquired property, Ms. Maya has generously authorized your final severance package." Chloe reached out with trembling fingers and tore open the white envelope. She pulled out the corporate check inside. She stared at the numbers, the reality of her ultimate defeat crushing her soul. It was a severance check for exactly $42. I looked at her, completely broken and destitute. I turned on my heel and walked out of the lobby, leaving her to pack her bags before the bulldozers arrived. While Chloe was frantically packing her bags to escape the arrival of my bulldozers, Marcus and Vivian were experiencing their own brutal descent into absolute poverty. They had been officially exiled to the east side of the city. It was the exact low-income neighborhood they had spent the last 30 years running away from and actively looking down upon. For decades, they had locked their luxury car doors when driving through these streets on their way to charity galas. Now it was their permanent reality. Their new residence was a cramped, dilapidated 2-bedroom apartment on the 5th floor of a crumbling brick walk-up building. There was no doorman, no gated security, and no valet. The building elevator had been broken for months, forcing them to drag their aging bodies up 5 flights of steep concrete stairs every single day. The apartment itself was a suffocating nightmare for 2 people who had built their entire identities on the illusion of vast generational wealth. The floors were covered in peeling yellow linoleum. The ancient radiator clanked and hissed violently throughout the night. The kitchen was a tiny, windowless alcove that constantly smelled of old cooking grease and bleach from the neighboring units. Vivian stood in the center of the cramped living room, wearing a silk designer nightgown that looked completely ridiculous against the backdrop of stained wallpaper. She stared in absolute horror at a cockroach scurrying across the cracked kitchen counter. She let out a high-pitched shriek, dropping the cheap plastic cup she had been holding. Marcus sat slumped on a sagging second-hand sofa he had bought from a discount warehouse. He did not even flinch at her screaming. Hal was staring blankly at a stack of past-due utility bills and a terrifying notice from the IRS regarding unpaid taxes on his liquidated assets. They had absolutely no savings, no retirement accounts, and no rich white son-in-law to bail them out. They were entirely destitute. "I cannot live like this!" Marcus Vivian sobbed dramatically, gripping her perfectly styled hair. "The water from the tap tastes like rust. The people in the hallway are loud and uncouth. We are prominent people. We belong in a mansion, not a slum. You have to fix this immediately." Marcus threw the stack of bills onto the cheap coffee table, his face dark with exhausted resentment. "Fix it with what, Vivian?" He snapped, his voice sharp and bitter. "My credit is completely destroyed. Every single person in our social circle has blocked my phone number. We have exactly $400 left to our name to last the rest of the month. You better get used to the tap water because we cannot afford bottled water anymore. But Vivian refused to accept her new social reality. She was heavily infected with a terminal case of narcissism and delusion. She firmly believed that if she just showed her face in the right circles, she could manipulate her way back into high society. Sunday morning arrived and Vivian spent 3 hours getting ready. She put on her most expensive tailored church suit, a matching wide-brimmed hat, and her last pair of designer heels. She was determined to attend service at the First Fellowship Cathedral, the most prominent and wealthy African-American church in the city. It was the epicenter of the Black elite, where judges, doctors, and corporate executives gathered every week. Vivian thought she could walk in, play the tragic victim of a greedy corporate daughter, and secure charity from her old peers. She ordered a cheap rideshare, refusing to take the public bus, and arrived at the Grand Cathedral just as the choir began to sing. Vivian held her head high, adjusting her posture to project unbothered arrogance. She marched up the plush carpet of the center aisle, aiming straight for the premium reserved pews near the front altar where she had sat for decades. Before she could even cross the midpoint of the sanctuary, a senior usher stepped directly into her path. The usher was a formidable, well-respected woman named Beatrice, who had served on the country club board alongside Vivian for years. Beatrice did not offer a warm Sunday greeting. She stood like a brick wall, her face completely devoid of any Christian charity. "Excuse me, Beatrice," Vivian whispered, offering a tight, artificial smile. "I am heading to my usual seat." Beatrice crossed her arms over her crisp white usher uniform, blocking the aisle entirely. "You do not have a usual seat here anymore," Beatrice stated, her voice low, but carrying a razor-sharp edge. "Those seats are reserved for respectable families who actually contribute to this community. We all know exactly what you did. We know you stole your own child college fund to buy a sports car and let her drown in medical debt. We know you protected a racist white man over your own flesh and blood." Vivian's face drained of all color beneath her expensive makeup. The surrounding congregation members had stopped singing. Several prominent women in the nearby pews deliberately turned their backs to her, shifting their shoulders to entirely block her from their view. The absolute coldness of the freeze-out was breathtaking. "You are a disgrace to this community," Beatrice continued, her eyes locked onto Vivian's terrified face. "You are not welcome in the front row of this sanctuary. You can sit in the folding chairs in the back overflow lobby by the exit doors, or you can turn around and walk right back out into the street. The choice is yours." Stripped of her armor and publicly humiliated in front of the entire congregation, Vivian's legs trembled. She turned around and did the walk of shame all the way down the center aisle, the judging stares of hundreds of elite peers burning into her back. She sat in a cheap metal folding chair near the drafty exit doors, completely isolated, realizing her social death was absolute and permanent. Monday morning brought an even harsher reality check for Marcus. With only a few $100s left, he was forced to swallow his massive pride and actively seek employment. He put on his best tailored suit, though it hung loosely on his shrinking frame, and took the public bus to the wealthy commercial district. He walked into Elite Motors, a high-end luxury car dealership, where he used to casually purchase vehicles with Preston's stolen money. Marcus adjusted his tie fully, believing his smooth-talking charm and extensive knowledge of luxury assets would easily secure him a senior sales position. He confidently approached the main reception desk and demanded to speak directly with the dealership general manager. He was escorted into a large glass-walled office overlooking the showroom floor. The manager was sitting with his back to the door, staring out at the inventory. "I am Marcus, a highly experienced asset manager," Marcus announced, puffing out his chest and projecting his old, booming authority. "I know exactly how to sell high-ticket items to elite buyers. I can move your premium inventory faster than anyone on your current floor." The leather chair slowly swiveled around. Marcus' breath caught in his throat. His confident smile instantly shattered. The general manager sitting behind the desk was a black man named Calvin. 10 years ago, Calvin had been a brilliant junior analyst working under Marcus at a regional investment firm. Marcus had made a catastrophic budgetary error while secretly funneling company funds to pay for one of Vivian's lavish country club galas. To save his own job and protect his reputation, Marcus had ruthlessly framed Calvin for the missing funds and fired him without a shred of mercy, nearly ruining the young man's life. Calvin leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished glass desk. He looked at Marcus' outdated suit and the desperate sweat gathering on his forehead. Calvin smiled, a slow, deeply satisfied smile. "Well, look who the cat dragged in," Calvin said, his voice dripping with pure vindictive pleasure. "I heard you lost your mansion, Marcus. I heard your daughter bought your debt and threw you out onto the street. And now you are standing in my office begging for a job selling cars you can no longer afford to drive." Marcus swallowed hard, his hands shaking at his sides. "Calvin, please," Marcus stammered, stripping away his pride. "I need this job. I have excellent sales experience. I can be an asset to this dealership. We can leave the past in the past." Calvin let out a sharp, humorless laugh. He picked up the copy of the resume Marcus had placed on the desk. He did not even read it. He simply held it over his sleek, motorized paper shredder and let go. The machine ground the paper to shreds, echoing loudly in the quiet office. "You framed me for your own theft 10 years ago," Marcus Calvin stated coldly, pressing a button under his desk to call security. "You tried to destroy my career to protect your fake rich lifestyle. I would not hire you to wash the tires on my lot. Security, escort this man off my property immediately, and if he comes back, call the police for trespassing." Two security guards grabbed Marcus by the arms, hauling him roughly across the showroom floor. He kicked and struggled, his outdated suit tearing at the shoulder seam as they dragged him past the luxury vehicles. The guards shoved him through the heavy glass doors, sending him stumbling out onto the wet pavement. A freezing, torrential rain had begun to fall, washing away the last shreds of his dignity. Marcus lay on the concrete, gasping for breath as the doors locked behind him. His former employee had just handed him the exact same cruelty he had dished out 10 years ago. Marcus took the crowded city bus back to the dilapidated apartment complex. He walked into the cramped unit entirely soaked and defeated. The heating system had completely failed. Vivian and Chloe were huddled together on the sagging discount sofa, wrapped in cheap, scratchy blankets. Chloe was staring blankly at her phone screen, displaying a negative balance. Vivian looked up as Marcus entered, her eyes hollow. She did not even need to ask how the interview went. "We have no money for groceries," Marcus stated, his voice devoid of life. "My final credit card was declined. We have nothing to eat, and the landlord just slid a late notice under the door." Panic gripped the small room. The reality of starvation set in. Vivian stood up, her hands shaking violently as she pulled her damp blanket tighter. "There is only one option left," Vivian whispered, her voice trembling with terror and wounded pride. "We have to go to Vanguard. We have to beg." Chloe snapped her head up. "We cannot go to Maya." Chloe shrieked, her narcissism flaring up. "She will humiliate us." Marcus slammed his hand against the wall, silencing his golden child. "She is already laughing," Chloe, Marcus roared. "She won the game. If we do not swallow our pride right now, we will be sleeping on a park bench by the weekend. Get your coats. We are going to the financial district." The bus ride downtown was agonizing. The three former socialites stood packed shoulder to shoulder with the working-class citizens they had spent their entire lives treating like garbage. When they finally arrived outside the towering glass skyscraper of Vanguard Financial, the freezing rain had intensified into a brutal downpour. They marched up to the revolving doors, but were instantly intercepted by two armed security guards. "You are on the corporate blacklist," a guard stated flatly, blocking their path. "You cannot enter this lobby. Stand back on the public sidewalk, or you will be arrested." Forced out into the open elements, Marcus, Vivian, and Chloe stood on the harsh concrete. The icy rain battered them mercilessly. Vivian's pristine hair was plastered flat against her skull. Her designer coat was soaked and heavy. Chloe's mascara ran down her cheeks in dark streaks. They looked exactly like the desperate beggars they used to sneer at from their luxury sedans. They waited in the freezing storm for 4 agonizing hours. They shifted their weight on aching feet, shivering violently in the bitter wind. They watched wealthy executives hurry past them in warm, dry coats, deliberately averting their eyes from the pathetic spectacle. Just after 6 in the evening, the heavy glass doors of the Vanguard lobby swung wide open. The atmosphere on the street shifted. A team of elite corporate security personnel stepped out, forming a protective barrier along the sidewalk. Right in the center of the formation was Maya. I stepped out into the stormy evening, completely untouched by the harsh elements. A towering security director held a massive black umbrella over my head, keeping me perfectly dry. I wore a flawless, tailored cashmere coat, radiating absolute power. I walked toward my waiting armored SUV, my custom leather heels clicking sharply against the wet pavement. Marcus broke away from his shivering wife and daughter. He lunged forward, breaking the invisible boundary of the sidewalk. Marcus cried out, his voice cracking with desperation. My guards instantly moved to intercept him, grabbing his arms, but I raised a single gloved hand. "Let him speak," I commanded, my voice cutting effortlessly through the sound of the freezing rain. Marcus did the unthinkable. The proud, arrogant patriarch who had demanded absolute submission from his family for 32 years collapsed onto the wet concrete. He fell directly to his knees, splashing dirty rainwater onto his torn pants. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Please," Marcus begged, holding his shaking hands up in a gesture of total surrender. "Please forgive us. I am so incredibly sorry for everything I did to you. We are starving, we are freezing. We have absolutely nothing left. Give us a second chance to be a real family." Vivian and Chloe rushed forward, falling to their knees right beside him in the puddles. "Maya, please," Vivian sobbed hysterically, clutching her ruined coat. "We learned our lesson. We know we were wrong. You are my beautiful, brilliant daughter. Please just give us a small apartment, just a tiny monthly allowance so we do not freeze to death on the street. We will do anything you want." Chloe wept loudly, burying her face in her hands, unable to look me in the eye. I stood under the umbrella, looking down at the three people who made my childhood a living nightmare. I looked at the father who stole my tuition, the mother who tried to ruin my reputation, and the sister who cheered them on. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity. They were just strangers kneeling in the mud. I stared down at their pathetic, shivering forms with icy indifference. "You did not come here for a daughter," I stated, my voice perfectly calm and completely devoid of mercy. "You came here for an ATM." I turned my back, stepping smoothly into the warm interior of my vehicle. "The bank is closed," I said. I pulled the heavy door shut. The armored SUV pulled away, leaving Marcus, Vivian, and Chloe kneeling in the freezing rain to drown in the consequences of their own horrific choices. The heavy tires of my armored SUV sliced through the flooded city streets, leaving my former family shrinking in the rearview mirror. I did not look back. I had completely severed the rotting branch of my family tree, and the immediate sense of liberation was intoxicating. By the time the morning sun broke through the lingering storm clouds, I was already standing on the cracked asphalt of the Starlight Motel parking lot. The air was sharp and cold, but the energy buzzing through my corporate team was electric. I wore a pristine white hard hat and a tailored ivory trench coat, standing in stark contrast to the decaying ruin in front of me. This was the exact miserable establishment where Chloe had been forced to scrub floors just days prior. Now it was merely an obstacle in my path to absolute market dominance. The massive yellow bulldozers roared to life, their diesel engines shaking the ground beneath my custom leather boots. I gave a single sharp nod to the site foreman. The heavy steel arm of the lead excavator swung forward violently, crashing right through the cheap plaster wall of the motel lobby. The exact front desk where my sister had stood in her oversized polyester uniform was instantly pulverized into a cloud of gray dust and shattered glass. I watched the physical destruction of the site with profound satisfaction. We were not just tearing down a blighted building, we were eradicating the final remnants of weakness and making way for an empire. The walls caved in, the roof collapsed, and the pathetic two-star motel was flattened into a pile of meaningless rubble. Within days, the debris was entirely cleared, and we broke ground on the city's most ambitious luxury development project. My reputation in the corporate world became absolutely unassailable. Financial analysts called me a visionary market disruptor. Competitors who had once dismissed me as a diversity hire were now actively begging my executive assistants for a 5-minute introductory meeting. I had systematically conquered the commercial real estate sector and firmly established Vanguard Financial as the undisputed apex predator of the market. My wealth multiplied with terrifying speed, but I had absolutely no intention of simply hoarding capital like Marcus and Vivian had tried to do. True power was not just about accumulating money, it was about weaponizing that money to permanently alter the landscape. 2 weeks after the demolition, I stood at a polished acrylic podium in the grand atrium of my corporate headquarters. Hundreds of reporters flashing cameras and prominent community leaders packed the room. The atmosphere was charged with intense anticipation. I wore a striking sapphire suit projecting complete absolute authority. I leaned into the microphone, letting the room fall into a heavy, respectful silence. I looked out at the sea of journalists, knowing that my words would echo across the entire country by nightfall. Today, we are not just announcing record-breaking corporate profits. I began, my voice ringing clearly through the massive hall. We are announcing a fundamental shift in how generational wealth is cultivated in our community. For too long, the concept of elite success has been gatekept by toxic individuals who protect their status by tearing down the vulnerable. I know what it means to be young, ambitious, and entirely unsupported. I know what it means to have your future actively stolen by the very people who were supposed to protect you. I know the crushing weight of navigating a system that demands excellence but offers absolutely zero safety net in return. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over the flashing cameras. 10 years ago, my own college tuition fund was secretly embezzled. Exactly $50,000 was stolen from me, leaving me to drown in massive medical debt and fight for my survival entirely alone. But today we turn that specific theft into a monumental opportunity. I am officially launching the Vanguard Phoenix Foundation. We are establishing a $50 million endowment exclusively dedicated to providing full-ride scholarships, housing stipends, and mental health resources for underprivileged Black youth who lack a family safety net. And the baseline seed money for every single student accepted into this program will be exactly $50,000. The grand atrium erupted into deafening applause. Reporters scrambled to document the historic announcement. I had just weaponized my trauma and turned it into the ultimate philanthropic victory. I was changing lives while simultaneously delivering a brutal public execution of my parents' toxic legacy. The story caught fire immediately. By evening, it was the lead segment on every single national news network. Social media platforms exploded with praise, hailing me as a visionary hero and a true champion of the community. I had transformed the exact dollar amount Marcus used to destroy me into a beacon of hope for thousands of aspiring students. Miles away from the glowing success of my corporate headquarters, Marcus and Vivian sat in the freezing darkness of their tiny, dilapidated apartment. The failing radiator hissed violently in the corner, doing absolutely nothing to warm the damp, moldy air. They were huddled together on their sagging second-hand sofa, wrapped in cheap, scratchy blankets they had salvaged from a discount bin. The only light in the cramped living room came from a tiny, staticky television set resting on a plastic milk crate. The scent of cheap bleach and old cooking grease permeated the suffocating space. Vivian gripped the frayed edges of her blanket, her face hollow and gaunt. Marcus stared at the glowing screen, his eyes wide with a horrifying mix of sheer disbelief and complete powerlessness. The local news anchor beamed brightly as footage of my press conference played on a continuous loop. The anchor enthusiastically repeated the $50,000 figure, explaining the tragic backstory of my stolen tuition and my triumphant rise to billionaire status. Every single person in their former elite social circle was currently watching this exact broadcast. The entire city now knew the precise dollar amount Marcus had stolen from his own daughter to fund his fake bougie lifestyle. Vivian let out a ragged, suffocating sob, pressing her hands tightly over her ears to block out the sound of my name being praised by millions. Marcus did not move a single muscle. I was forced to sit in the freezing squalor of his own making, utterly bankrupt and completely broken, watching the scapegoat he had ruthlessly discarded become a beloved national hero. The media coverage of my philanthropy did not just reach the crumbling apartment of my parents. It also reached the cheap motel room where Chloe was currently squatting. 3 days after the Vanguard Phoenix Foundation launch, a crumpled envelope arrived at my private estate. It was delivered through the standard postal service, completely lacking the expensive wax seals and embossed lettering my sister used to obsess over. I stood in my marble kitchen holding the cheap thin paper up to the light. The handwriting was erratic and desperate. I slid a silver letter opener through the flap and pulled out 3 pages of lined notebook paper. It was a pathetic, groveling manifesto from the former golden child. Chloe had poured her absolute desperation onto the page, completely throwing our parents under the bus to save her own skin. "Maya, please read this." Chloe wrote, her handwriting smudged with dried tears. "I was completely brainwashed by Mom and Dad. They manipulated me my entire life, making me believe I was better than you. Preston was a racist monster, and I was just his innocent victim. I have absolutely nothing left, Maya. I am begging you for a chance to rebuild our sisterhood. Let me come work for you at Vanguard. I can be your executive assistant. I can fetch your coffee and manage your schedule. I will do whatever it takes to prove I am loyal to you now. Please do not leave your only sister out in the cold." I stared at the wrinkled notebook paper. The sheer breathtaking delusion of her request was almost comical. Chloe actually believed she could abuse me for 32 years, sit back while her racist husband degraded my bloodline, and then simply apply for a job at my multi-billion-dollar corporation when her fake life imploded. She wanted to ride my coattails again, just wearing a different uniform. I did not even bother reading the 3rd page. I walked directly over to my home office and fed the pathetic letter straight into the heavy-duty cross-cut shredder. The loud, mechanical grinding sound was incredibly satisfying. I watched her desperate excuses turn into tiny, meaningless ribbons of waste paper. I picked up my secure phone and called my elite security director. "We are initiating a total communications blackout," I commanded, my voice firm and absolute. "Change all my personal phone numbers immediately. Reroute any incoming calls from unverified contacts to the legal department. Upgrade the biometric scanners at every single entrance of my private estate and the Vanguard corporate headquarters. If Marcus Vivian or Chloe step within 500 feet of my properties, you are to call the police and press charges for harassment." I hung up the phone and let out a long, deep breath. The boundary was officially set in stone. I was completely unburdening myself from the toxic anchors that had tried to drown me since childhood. I had severed the final rotting thread tying me to my abusers. They were no longer my family. They were just ghosts of a miserable past I had successfully conquered. 6 months passed with brutal, uncompromising speed. The harsh winter gave way to a sweltering, humid summer. The consequences of their horrific choices had fully settled into their bones. The universe was exacting its ultimate revenge completely without my intervention. Preston stood shivering in a greasy uniform, shivering not from the cold, but from utter humiliation. The man who used to wear custom-tailored suits and manage multi-million-dollar portfolios was currently wearing a cheap plastic visor and a headset. He was working the evening shift at a high-volume fast food drive-thru on the extreme edge of the city. He had been permanently blacklisted from every single financial institution in the country, facing crippling fines from the federal government. He leaned out of the small drive-thru window, holding a greasy paper bag, smelling permanently of old frying oil. A sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the window. The driver rolled down the tinted window to retrieve the food. Preston's heart completely stopped. The driver was one of his former elite clients from his Vanguard days. The wealthy client recognized Preston immediately, looking him up and down with an expression of pure, unfiltered disgust. The client snatched the paper bag out of Preston. Trembling hands laughed sharply and drove away without leaving a tip. Preston stood there, his ego completely shattered, forever trapped in a cage of his own making. Miles away, on the dark, dangerous streets of the inner city, Chloe was sitting on a crowded midnight public transit bus. The former queen of the country club was gripping a cheap plastic grocery bag on her lap. She was wearing a hideous neon blue polo shirt, the mandatory uniform for her new minimum wage job at a massive discount retail store. Her feet throbbed violently in her cheap sneakers, having spent 9 hours standing on hard concrete floors folding discounted sweaters, while managers screamed at her for being too slow. The bus hit a massive pothole, jarring her spine. She looked out the scratched, dirty window, watching the city lights blur past her. She thought about her old collection of red-bottom designer heels and the luxury sports car our parents had mortgaged their home to buy her. She had traded her soul for a fake life, and now she was riding the night bus to absolute nowhere completely alone and entirely forgotten by the high society friends she once worshipped. The situation was even more toxic inside the tiny dilapidated fifth-floor apartment. Marcus and Vivian were trapped together in a suffocating prison of poverty. The sweltering summer heat turned their cramped, unventilated living room into an oven. They stood in the tiny grease-stained kitchen screaming at the top of their lungs. "You ruined everything!" Marcus Vivian shrieked, slamming a final disconnect notice for their electricity onto the peeling laminate counter. "If you had just been a better businessman, we would not be living in this disgusting slum. You let that white fraud steal our money, and you let Maya steal our house. You are a complete failure." Marcus slammed his fist against the cheap refrigerator, denting the thin metal. "Do not you dare put this on me, Vivian!" Marcus roared, his face purple with rage and high blood pressure. "You spent decades treating our oldest daughter like garbage just to buy ugly designer clothes you could not afford. You drove her away. You dug this grave for us, and now we have to die in it." They glared at each other, the air thick with resentment and profound hatred. The romantic illusion of their high society marriage was dead. They had no money, no status, and no golden child to project their vanity onto. They were just two miserable, impoverished people trapped in a tiny, sweltering box, waiting for the lights to be shut off forever. They were finally paying the ultimate price for a lifetime of greed. The crisp autumn air carried the faint scent of roasted pine and expensive perfume. Exactly 1 year after I stood in the VIP dining room and stripped my family of their fake kingdom, I returned to Oak Ridge Country Club to host the inaugural Vanguard Phoenix Scholarship Gala. The sprawling estate was entirely unrecognizable. I had poured millions into a massive renovation, completely stripping away the outdated, stuffy colonial decor that Marcus and Vivian had worshipped for decades. The walls were now draped in rich, modern textures, showcasing breathtaking original artwork from emerging Black artists. The heavy, suffocating atmosphere of exclusionary elitism had been permanently eradicated. In its place, I built a sanctuary of genuine excellence. The grand ballroom was packed, but the guest list was radically different from the fake high society crowds my mother used to court. There were no gossiping socialites, no fraudulent finance bros, and no arrogant legacy members desperate to maintain their fragile status. The room was filled with authentic community leaders, successful entrepreneurs, and global philanthropists who actually used their wealth to build up the marginalized. At the very center of the ballroom sat the true guests of honor, 50 brilliant, ambitious Black youth from the most underfunded districts in the state. Each of them had just been awarded a full-ride university scholarship and a baseline seed fund of $50,000. I walked among their tables, listening to their dreams of becoming corporate leaders, doctors, and architects. I saw mothers weeping with sheer relief, knowing their children would never have to drown in the kind of predatory medical debt that almost destroyed my life. I shook hands with fathers who looked at me with profound respect. I was giving these families the exact safety net my own parents had ruthlessly stolen from me. I wore a breathtaking custom-designed gown of deep midnight blue silk that cascaded perfectly to the marble floor. The fabric shifted like liquid water with every step I took. Diamonds rested against my collarbone, catching the light from the massive crystal chandeliers above, but they were not bought on credit. I owned every single thing I wore, every brick of the building I stood in, and every facet of the empire I commanded. The heavy, crushing weight of being the family's scapegoat, the constant anxiety of never being good enough, the desperate childhood yearning for a mother approval that would never come, it was all entirely gone. I excused myself from the bustling ballroom and stepped out onto the grand wraparound balcony. The cool night breeze rustled the sheer fabric of my gown. I rested my hands on the smooth stone railing, looking out over the sprawling manicured grounds of the country club. The rolling green golf courses and perfectly illuminated pathways stretched out for miles under the clear, starry sky. I owned all of it. I took a deep breath of the crisp air, letting the absolute magnitude of my victory settle into my bones. I had successfully broken a vicious cycle of narcissistic abuse that had poisoned my bloodline for generations. A year ago, I was standing right inside this building, having a $20 bill thrown at my face by a racist white brother-in-law, while my sister smirked and my parents cheered him on. They had tried to humiliate me. They had tried to steal my inheritance, ruin my reputation, and drain my spirit, just to keep themselves elevated. Now Preston was serving greasy French fries through a drive-through window. Chloe was folding cheap sweaters on the night shift. Marcus and Vivian were trapped in a sweltering roach-infested apartment fighting over unpaid electricity bills. The universe had delivered the exact brutal consequences they had earned. I felt absolutely no guilt. I felt no lingering sadness. The space in my heart, where my toxic family used to reside, was now filled with the immense joy of the 50 students sitting inside my ballroom. I had transformed the darkest betrayal of my life into a blazing beacon of hope for others. The heavy glass door leading out to the balcony opened with a soft click. I turned my head slightly as Mr. Sterling stepped out into the cool night air. The general manager who had once been ordered by my father to throw me out of the VIP suite was now my most trusted and loyal hospitality director. He walked toward me with impeccable posture, his uniform tailored to absolute perfection, carrying a polished silver tray. Resting perfectly in the center of the tray was a single crystal flute filled with the most exclusive vintage champagne my private cellars had to offer. Mr. Sterling stopped beside me and offered a deep, respectful bow before holding out the silver tray. "A spectacular evening, Miss Maya," he said, his voice carrying a tone of profound admiration and genuine warmth. "The event is a monumental success. The board of directors is absolutely thrilled, and the scholarship recipients are currently enjoying the dessert service." I took the crystal flute from the silver tray, the cool glass feeling perfectly grounded in my hand. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," I replied, keeping my voice steady and content. "It has been a truly remarkable journey to get to this night." Mr. Sterling looked out over the sprawling, illuminated estate, then glanced back at me with a knowing, subtle gleam in his eye. He adjusted his suit jacket, standing perfectly at attention. "Did your family happen to make an appearance tonight, Ms. Maya?" he asked, his tone perfectly polite, but layered with the quiet, shared knowledge of our absolute victory. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the vintage champagne, letting the crisp, bright flavor wash over me. I looked out over the vast, magnificent estate I now completely owned, entirely unburdened by the ghosts of my miserable past. I smiled radiantly, letting the sheer, unadulterated joy of my freedom illuminate my face. "They are exactly where they belong, Mr. Sterling, and finally so am I. The greatest lesson here is that your worth is never defined by people who refuse to see it. Sometimes the family supposed to protect you becomes the anchor trying to drag you down. Walking away from toxic blood ties is not a failure. It is a brave act of self-preservation. True success means using your pain to build healing and opportunity for others. When you stop seeking validation from those committed to misunderstanding you, you finally claim your absolute power." Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to find your peace? Share your story in the comments below and hit subscribe to join our community of strong survivors.